Mhm. Waiting. Mhm. Mhm. Nothing going on yet. Nothing going on yet. Oh, Halsey. Halsey is live. Nothing going on yet. Good. Oh, Halsey. Halsey is live. Nothing going on yet. Okay. Good. Let's go. Let's go watch Halsey. But it's not going to be immediate. Halsey. Why does he use the infinity sign? Okay, we'll come back to Halsey. Syria Falls, it's no, it's not a good thing. 5 days ago.
Obviously, we are jumping onto the stream here early because I am fired up. I have been fired up because I'm looking at people's tweets on X, things that they are saying about the fall of Syria. People know nothing. I'm tired of the mainstream media lying about what's going on there. I'm tired of Castro.
Everybody's lying, except for Candace. Candace is telling us the truth. Everybody else is lying. Oh, I didn't bring the other support from my iPhone.
Christianity in the West, people not understanding that Christians are being mass slaughtered, and it's intentional. It's all intentional. I'm tired of neocons, so this is going to be an episode we're going to call.
It's all intentional. It's all intentional. We want to murder Christians, of course, because it gives the U.S. or whoever great benefit.
Out some of these neocon takes on what's happening. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for nobody but Israel. It's very clear. It's a good thing for nobody but Israel. And I have somebody saying,
it's good for Israel for Christians to be massacred.
Here, who is an expert on the topic. So we're not going to do an intro today. I'm just going to say, Scott Horton, welcome to the Candace Show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
So you're an expert on.
You're an expert at disinformation.
On the stuff. And so what I want you to really do is there are so many Americans, and I count myself among them previously, who don't even understand what's happening in the Middle East. Like we're Generation 9/11. We're a generation every single day on our TV screens. We're being told we're fighting terror. We're scared when we're at the airport. We're suddenly taking off our shoes, our belts, looking at people funny if they have dark skin, wondering whether or not they're going to blow up our planes. Truly like Stalin level propaganda taking place in our school systems to remind us of 9/11 every single day, having to stand up and at 9/11 in my school and a moment of silence to remember, what these jihadists did, this terrible thing that they did. And then I grew up and I realized everything we learn in school is a lie. I'm looking around our country. It's in managed decline. They're telling us that we have to keep fighting terror. We're spreading democracy. And none of this stuff is adding up anymore. So I want to slow off because you are also an expert on Russia. You wrote this book that I'm holding right here called Provoked. I want you to explain to my listeners, and I mean, dumb this down. Like this is the best way to learn. I want people to feel invited. You don't need to be an expert on Middle Eastern politics to understand what happens. When, why, and how did America get involved in Syria?
Well, let's go back further, okay? I think everybody in your audience knows about Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan in the 1980s. We've all seen Rambo 3.
Yeah, but let's assume we don't. I'm born in 89. I know about Afghanistan now.
Okay,
but let's
go back.
Let's assume everybody knows nothing.
Okay,
yeah.
So in 1979, there's an Islamist revolution in Iran, and the Shiites take power. Very importantly, it's the Shiite Cyclone in Afghanistan in the 1980s. We've all seen Rambo 3.
Yeah, but let's assume we don't. I'm born in 89. I know about Afghanistan now.
Okay,
but let's
go back.
Let's assume everybody knows nothing.
Okay,
yeah.
So in 1979, there's an Islamist revolution in Iran, and the Shiites take power. Very importantly, it's the Shiite clerics, the mullahs, as they call them, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who took power. Now, they usually leave out the fact that he was living in France in exile at the time, and it was Jimmy Carter's State Department CIA who said, we know this guy. He's a friend of ours. He helped us overthrow the government back in 1953. We can deal with him. So the Carter government asked the French to put him on the plane and send him back to Iran, where he inherited the revolution against the American sock puppet dictator, the Shah Reza Pahlavi, who was forced to flee. He was dying of cancer anyway, and he was forced to flee. Now, most people, say your father's generation, for example, all they remember is the Iranians saying, great Satan, and burning American flags. But what happened was, and that's the Iranian Revolution, but that wasn't until November. The original revolution was in February. And for 10 months, America was still getting along with the new Ayatollah's regime. It wasn't until Jimmy Carter, on advice or request from David Rockefeller, invited the Shah into the United States for cancer treatment. And that sent the signal to the revolutionaries that America was going to try to reinstall him on the throne. That was when they sacked the embassy and took the hostages. And that's the part everyone remembers now. But there was 10 months between the revolution and the hostage taking. Not to excuse the hostage taking, but just to say this wasn't necessarily an...
So taking the hostages is literally against the Quran. So the Quran says that you're not allowed to take your guests hostage. And Khomeini actually didn't want to do it, but he was afraid of the students who were leading this revolution. He was their puppet.
The anti-American revolution in the first place. Like I say, it was an old friend of America's who was in charge. And very importantly, and this is in the book Treacherous Alliance by Trita Parsi, which I urge you and your entire audience to read. It's one of the most important books about the Middle East you'll ever read.
Let's see what's going on with Halsey.
And I thought, why should I waste my time? Like, people aren't stupid. We know what we're looking at, and we know what garbage is. And there's so much drama going on the platforms in the first place. I can't do it. So what I figure is I'll do a typical show that I normally do, and I'll stay as long as I can until people stop asking questions. So if there's anything you want to know, go for it. But first, let me do some house cleaning. If you want to donate to the show, please use the subscribe star or the Streamlab links in the description. It really helps me keep doing what I'm doing. So if you can donate, please do. We got an interesting week coming ahead. We have Sammy coming back one day. We have Tuesday night a panel we're doing on APAC and influence on the country. It'll be a Twitter space that I will also be putting here. On Wednesday, we have Aaron Clary and TFM. We're going to be talking about Aaron Clary's books and a couple interesting things about that. I'm not sure what we got going on Thursday, but it seems like we're going to have a lot of fun and be able to answer a lot of questions and talk about a lot of interesting stuff. Next week, we have a whole bunch of stuff coming up as well. And I will keep you guys informed on who we can keep going. TFM gave good pushback against your haters. Are you talking about on the Wednesday show or just in general? Or last night? I don't know. I don't know what you're specifically referring to. I mean, I've addressed this like a dozen times, but I'll do it again. Me and TFM don't have beef. Like it's not like I think if I disagree with him, somehow I dislike the guy. Like if we disagree on something, that's just it. It's that we disagree. I mean, I have the typical problem of any single time I say anything that people don't like, then all of a sudden they have to start coming after me because I'm Jewish, which, oh well, like haters gonna hate. It's just the way that it goes. But let me see. I don't really have any updates on the whole drone thing. People keep asking me about it. Look, they're still all over the place supposedly, but the longer this goes on, the more and more Mr. Slave add more details. What do you mean? I don't want to go. If I have to go find the Saturday night show and go through, it's usually 3-4 hours long, and without timestamps, I'm not going to listen to the whole thing about it. So if you could just either sum it up or give me some timestamps, then I'll go take a listen. But I can't listen to a 4-hour show just to figure out what was said. But the drones are all over the place. No, they are there. I mean, there's tons of video of it. They're all over the place. But the longer it goes on, the more I just assume that it's got to be something by our government. Whatever our government's doing, I don't think it's like necessarily nefarious, but at the same time, like the longer they just keep playing dumb and saying they don't know what it is, and they don't know where they are. Like I don't. Yeah, exactly, Marty. I'm not doing it. I'm not listening to a 6.5 hour show to hear 5 minutes going after people who hate on me. I just don't care enough. But yeah. So the more the drone thing goes on, the more I just assume it's some kind of like either federal test or, I'm disappointed you took the side of Mikey on X. You saw how much he harassed me. I didn't take the side of anybody. I definitely didn't take the side of Mikey. What I offered Mikey was if he really, really, really wanted to, I would have a conversation with him and I would go after him for what I had heard about him. But I honestly don't know anything about taking Mikey's side. I definitely wouldn't take any side against my friends. So I don't know. Again, I'm not willing to jump into some huge Twitter nonsense drama, but I'm not sure what you mean about that I took his side. I mean, that would be really interesting. I don't even know what you're talking about, pretty much. But anyway, as I was saying, I think the more and more we go into this, I think the more and more that we're going to find out this was some kind of federal operation, whether it be a testing thing, whether it be that they're looking. I saw a report that they're looking for gamma rays because there's some kind of report of a dirty bomb or a rogue nuclear device. But I don't know. I can't buy it. I can't buy that it's that strong. I would assume more if it's federal that it's some kind of federal test, and they're trying to figure out how these drones work. Because as I said, the longer this goes on, and the more people are complaining about it and putting videos on it and all of that, and the federal government just doesn't seem to have any clue what's going on. I can't buy that it's like some foreign op that they're just letting go on. In some other news, I see that they've instructed, the Israeli government has instructed their foreign ministry to take down the embassy in Ireland. They've decided Ireland is a a foreign government, that no, it's not aircraft because they're not flying in a flight pattern. They fly all over the place. So it can't just be regular aircraft. It couldn't even be helicopters. Like they don't have but again, PLA, I don't know what I did wrong. As I said, the guy wrote to me, he said, I think you heard all wrong. And I said, look, I'll do a space with you and I'll give you a chance to say what you got to say. And I'm going to say what I got to say and we'll let the chips fall where they may. And he kept giving me excuses as to why he couldn't. He sent me like 100 voice messages, which I'm not listening to. And he just tried to convince me that all these people believe that he's a good guy and oy vey and all this. And I'm not, I don't have time for this kind of drama. So no, I'm not taking anyone's side that's against you guys. Like, I don't even know what their argument is. And I particularly don't care. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, I don't betray my friends because some guy on Twitter decides to send me messages saying my friends suck. Like, that's okay. I'm used to people telling me my friends suck. I don't really care about it. But anyway, what I was saying about the drones is I really do think that it's something to do with the government. And Israel is now cutting ties with Ireland, which, I mean, that was a good thing. I mean, I'm glad they feel confident enough to do something like that without worrying about what will the European Union think or what will anyone else think. I'm glad they're just able to kind of work within their interests and see, where it goes from there. But other than that, I don't have anything. I'm looking on Twitter now because I haven't gotten any more questions. But show any video of drones, you'll see that it is clear that it's just an aircraft. I mean, again, I've watched them not in an analytical fashion. I just watched them. So I'll have to take your word for it until I see further. But as of right now, I haven't seen any videos where they show a distinct direct pattern of flight. So we'll just have to see where they go from there. There was some other stuff. There was some other drama that was going on that I wanted to weigh in on. But again, the drone thing, the Israel thing, I don't really have so much more. So I figured I would just open it up for questions. PLA, if you, as I said, if you've got a specific gripe against me, like, list it, I'll be happy to address it. But I'm definitely not taking Mikey's side in anything. I don't have any clue what Mikey even is talking about, and I haven't listened to any of the messages. I'm not even positive I will. My life is hectic enough. I don't have time to listen to half an hour video voice messages about drama that doesn't really concern me. And if he's as much of a scumbag as people say, then what? I'm going to believe that this scumbag has something rational to say when I could completely care less. So no, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to keep going. But as I said, if you have something specific to tell me, then tell me. But other than that, I don't know. Let's see. There was a whole bunch more drama going on that now I can't find any. And usually I have a dozen questions by now. Let's see. What else is there? The girl who falsely accused the Duke lacrosse players of rape and tried ruining their lives. Reverend Al Sharpton was one of their loudest supporters. Later, she murdered her boyfriend by stabbing him. You know what? I'm not surprised. I mean, I think it takes a real evil psychopath to accuse people of rape that never did it. Like, it's one thing if there's like, if you're on shaky ground, like some guy came on really strong and some girl didn't know how to say no, and it led to something she didn't want to do. Like, that doesn't take a psychopath. That just takes someone who, is reading the situation wrong. But a person that like falsely accuses someone of rape, knowing that there's a decent chance they could go to prison for it, knowing that they're going to ruin, those person's lives. I think if they keep it up and they keep doing something like that and they don't confess to it and they let it go to trial and stuff like that, I think that they're just so psychopathic that yes, you are going to wind up in a scenario where those type of crazy people are going to do something else crazy in the meantime because it's just too much. But hold hold on, let me see. There was something else. The Walther PDP. I don't know enough about it. I only have had Walthers that are in 22 long rifle, so I don't have any opinion on it. Listen, Walther makes great guns. I just don't have any. So she only waited 20 years to confess. That's my point. Is that if now, granted, I understand that sometimes you become like committed to the lie, but if you get committed to the lie, it goes to court, they're found innocent, like, okay, so you admit that maybe you had the facts wrong or something, but she seemed to be a complete psychopath. And her whole goal in life seemed to be to ruin these people's lives. And when you're dealing with someone like that, as I said, you're dealing with a psychopath. So I don't know how you can like expect rational behavior from someone like that when they're so ridiculously irrational in the first place, you know? So here we go. Like, this is where we go back and forth. TFM was talking mad shit about Halsey last night, and someone just spent 5 minutes saying like that TFM gave good pushback against my haters, but no one's telling me what was said. So I'm very curious as to what was said, whether it was him talking shit or whether it was him giving good pushback against my haters. I don't know. So I didn't listen to the show. I have no idea what was said about me one way or the other, but I would definitely like to, before you say, oh, he was giving good pushback, tell me what pushback he was giving. If you say that he was talking mad shit, I want to know what he was saying. Like, don't just sit here and, make a charge without any kind of backup. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume that you're just not making any sense in the first place. So yeah, if that's the case, then I don't know. I'll just ignore it if we're not in a situation, as I said, where you're going to give me some kind of example. Why is TFM so obsessed with hypersonic rockets? For the same reason, that Halsey, someone said you were wrong about something, and TFM, what was TFM said? What was he wrong about? And he does his mocking voice, like, okay, well, it's fine if I buy into the Israeli propaganda because I'm Jewish, but as I said, I don't say anything that I don't bring receipts for. So if there's some kind of, if there's some kind of debunking evidence to what I said, then anyone is free to send it to me anytime they want, and I'd be happy to look at it, and I'd be happy to even comment on it. But as I said, with all, so I don't know how I could further buy into or debunk propaganda if no one is telling me what that propaganda is or what the alternative evidence is. What I'm not going to do is play a game of moral equivalency. Is that if there's plenty of evidence towards something and the rebuttal is a Twitter post from some retarded person that I could care less what they have to say, like, if that's the case, then no, I'm not going to give it moral equivalency where I'm going to say that, okay, I have to weigh them both equally. And that's not buying into propaganda. That's refusing to be propagandized. And I'm not going to feel bad about that. Will Haredi Jews settle the newly occupied territories? There are no newly occupied territories as of right now. If there were going to be territories where Israeli settlements were going to if that's the case, then that's what I'm saying. I like how people say shit that didn't happen during the TFM show when it's literally online and can be checked word for word. That's my point. Also, like, people are telling me shit in this chat right now, but you know what? Usually if there's some kind of controversy involving me, like, I start getting messages of people that want to tell me about it. So, and I haven't gotten anything. So I would assume that was just whatever. So what was the other thing? The other person said that you hurt his feelings being a MGTOW. Okay, well, look, it's not my job to make people feel good about themselves. If you're comfortable being MGTOW, then be MGTOW. Like, who am I to stop you? I don't care one way or the other. Like, it makes no difference to me. Like, if a guy walks away from women and that's going to be his thing in life, that he's not going to be with women, then why would it matter to me one way or the other? Like, it doesn't impact my life at all. It doesn't change anything for me. The only thing that matters to me is if someone asks me about it, what do I think about something? And I'll give them my honest opinion. I'm not going to waste my time like sitting here trying to, approve or disapprove of people's lifestyles. Everybody has their own lifestyle and everyone has their own thing. What am I going to do? Tell someone who went full MGTOW that what they should do is get married and just bite the bullet, and then what happens? They do it, they get divorced rate, they get taken advantage of, and something happens. Like what? How is that on me? I don't want someone's life choices to come on me. If someone asks my opinion, I'll give it. But I'm definitely not going to be the guy that starts going around telling people what to do that have never asked my opinion in the first place. And again, about Haredi, from what I understand, there are no occupied territories as right now. The only place that Israeli troops are where they weren't is a buffer zone in Syria and a little piece of the Golan on the other side of Mount Hermon. I can't imagine there are going to be settlements there anytime soon. But I will say this, in answer to your general question, if I believe that there are going to be occupied territories, yes, I believe there will be probably Haredi Jews that will settle some of them. They're the ones that need the space the most, as they're the ones with growing families. That you should not be allowed in a MGTOW server. Okay, well, if that's how they feel, then that's how they feel. I haven't cared much about people's opinions before, and if TFM had a problem with it, he would have told me about it. So I don't see that being like a real issue. I think that's an issue that's coming up from people that, I don't know, just want to, again, cause drama. Maybe that's all I can think of. So I'm not going to play into the drama. I'm not going to play into the rumor mill. Like, as I said, I consider him a friend. I consider him someone I enjoy talking to. And just because we disagree on things, I'm not going to sit here and start fights with people. The recent expansion into the Golan Heights isn't much. It's a small buffer zone on the border, and as I said, the other side of Mount Hermon, which is like a big mountain, but it's not really like settle area a bowl. From what I did see, all of the village elders in the in the Syrian Golan that are in the buffer zone were asked would they rather be part of Syria or part of Israel, and they all said part of Israel. And now there's a question as to whether those villages should be annexed, but I don't know what that means. It's not only heavily mined, but it's really cold up there. It's not the kind of area that, and it's not very well developed either. Funny enough, that's where they started that village that they named after Trump. It's called like Trump Hill or something like that. But I don't see, like, they haven't been successful at getting a lot of people to celebrate the part of the Golan that they annexed years ago. Like, yes, there are people up there. Yes, there are farms up there, but there's not like an abundance of population up there. It's not like they were able to convince tons of the population to move there because it's going to be the next, super awesome. But I don't know how they would plan to occupy or to do anything with if the end result is that it's just not going to be that successful. I mean, again, I would imagine that Haredi people will go settle wherever there's land that they can take advantage of cheaply and move and build large communities. But also, you have to consider that a lot of those areas, they want to be within some sort of public transportation from Bnei Brak or Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Ramat Beit Shemesh, where all of the major yeshivas are. So, no, they don't get a lot of water. They get almost all their water from Lake Kinneret, which borders the Golan, but that's always been where Israel got its water from was Lake Kinneret. So, no, I don't see. I'm starting to see a lot of we regret voting for Trump. What's up with that? I don't know how you can regret voting for the guy when he hasn't done anything yet. He hasn't been inaugurated yet. Like, we can't be against what he plans. No, I don't understand why people are getting so uppity when the guy hasn't even been inaugurated yet. Like, let him do something that you're actually pissed about before you start regretting voting for him. I mean, I can understand if he said, like, from day one that I get elected, I'm going to open up the border and forget deportations and stuff like that. But I don't understand what there is to be upset about right now. So people should just chill out and give it till January and wait and see what he does. Do you think the situation in Iran is kind of similar to South Africa circa 19? No, I don't, because I don't think that Iran is influenceable by outside forces like South Africa was. In South Africa, they wanted there to be a solution. They just didn't know what it was. And with all the terrorism and with all the civil unrest and with everything going on, I don't think that.
And it's all told from the point of view of the American, Israeli, and Iranian strategists at the highest level. Of course, the poor Iraqis are just stuck in the middle, but we'll get to that. But so the Iranian Revolution happens in 79. Carter is humiliated by the hostage crisis. So he announces the Carter Doctrine in his State of the Union speech in 1980, which says America will now treat the Persian Gulf as an American lake. If any other power threatens it, read the Soviet Union, we will go to war. In other words, even though we just lost Iran and the people in charge are now mad at us and just took our hostages, we're essentially giving them a war guarantee that if the Soviet Union invades Iran, we will stop them because we won't let them take over the Gulf. And then as part of that same doctrine, they started building up bases throughout the Gulf, and they gave the green light to Saddam Hussein, who had just
so America is building up now bases. Right. We're talking about the early 80s. We start building bases.
This is still Carter, right? 79, 80, because he lost in 80. So this is like his last year in office. So we start building up, and he gives the green light to Saddam Hussein, who had just seized power in a bloody coup in Iraq. He gives him the green light to invade Iran. Now, why does Saddam Hussein?
This is very important because Generation 9/11 here, all we ever told Saddam Hussein, he's crazy, he's a dictator, everyone kind of gets that treatment in the end. And I had to remind people that were listening to this podcast, no, this used to be an ally. All of these people that you're hearing are dictators, Gaddafi, they were allies to the United States.
Before they got backstabbed.
So now you're bringing us Saddam Hussein, he gets the green light from America, and they're like, do your thing. Like, we actually want you to invade.
Exactly right. So they help him to invade, and they fought essentially a stalemate, a horrible stalemate war all through the 1980s. Saddam Hussein's Iraq versus the Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran. And America was backing Iraq, which was armed with all Soviet weapons, against Iran that was all armed with American weapons.
Wait, say that again. So America is backing...
America had been supporting Iran until the revolution. So that was why they were flying F-4s and F-14s and fighting with American weapons, where Saddam Hussein's military had been built up by the Soviet Union, but he had just been brought into the American fold. So
I don't think Iran has F-14s. It has F-4s. Does it have F-14s? Let's ask ChatGPT. No, let's ask this guy. Does Iran have F-14? It might. Yes, Iran still operates at the F-14. Okay.
It's America backing a Soviet army against an American army in Iran. Isn't it crazy? So this is they're only just beginning to switch sides back and forth in the war now. Okay, now at the same time this is going on, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. The Americans, and we know this, I demonstrate this in my previous book and so forth, they increase support for the Mujahideen forces fighting against the Soviet Union in order to provoke them into invading. The thinking was, Vietnam became shorthand for a terrible thing that you should not have done. So they said, we just gave ourselves a Vietnam. Now let's give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam in Afghanistan by luring them in, bleeding them to bankruptcy, forcing them out the long way and the hard way. And truly, I don't think anyone could argue. Democrats and Republicans agree, and I think I do too. This was one of the major things that helped to destroy the Soviet Union. It was one of the straws that broke the camel's back of the commie USSR, was this fool's errand in Afghanistan, trying to coin a phrase, trying to prop up the communist government there. Now, very importantly, part of that effort was backing not just the local Afghan Mujahideen, but a whole new group of mercenaries who were called the Arab Afghan Army, or the International Islamist Brigades. This is the Azam group that became the Bin Laden group. These are the international terrorists. Saudis, Syrians, Libyans, even some Palestinians. Azam was a Palestinian who'd been living in a refugee camp in Kuwait. Why was he living in a refugee camp? Okay, we'll get back to that. Anyway, these Arab mercenaries ended up becoming under the control of Osama bin Laden, which merged the Azam group with what was then called Egyptian Islamic Jihad.
So just to slow down, people are listening. So we are arming rebels because we're essentially fighting a proxy war with the Soviet Union. They're in Afghanistan making a terrible mistake. We see it as an opportunity. A lot of this is really just been a proxy war with Russia. We'll get to that later. And this now brings in, so first we're backing Saddam Hussein. We're going to find out later that he's actually a terrible, evil dictator and terrorist. Now we're backing Osama bin Laden. We've got these people, these jihadists. We're giving them money. We're giving them weapons. We're going, this is good for us. And Hillary Clinton admits this on tape years later. Mujahideen, we funded all of these rebels, and then we declared them problematic in the future. So now we've got Osama bin Laden in the mix. What happens? What happens in Afghanistan?
Okay, and people can reference, there's a movie and a book called Charlie Wilson's War, all about this as well. Rambo 3 I like to mention because there's some funny anecdotes in the conversation that Colonel Troutman, Rambo's hero, Rambo's leader, says, we already had our Vietnam, now you're going to have yours. Right? That was exactly what they were doing there, okay? So, and they're supporting, again, not just the Afghans, but this international Islamist group. Okay, so now, it's the end of the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq war comes to a negotiated settlement, the line really hasn't even moved, the war's essentially over as a stalemate. The Afghan war comes to an end, the Soviets withdraw, and it takes the Mujahideen about another 2 years to finish killing off the communists in Kabul. Okay, now Saddam Hussein has a problem with Kuwait and Saudi and UAE. They're all calling in his war debts from the Iran-Iraq war, but he can't pay them off because oil's trading at about $10 a barrel. He's making no money whatsoever, and he's got the Kuwaitis are slant drilling from the shared Rumelia oil field on the Iraq-Kuwait border. And they have quotas on how much you're allowed to produce. Same as like West Texas. We own adjacent property on the ground, but we have a shared well beneath, but we have a quota how much we're allowed to produce each month and not cheat each other. Otherwise, you get your knees broke. That's West Texas rules. Well, the Kuwaitis were cheating. So James Baker, the Secretary of State, told Saddam Hussein, well, go ahead and break their legs. Those are the rules. See if I care. And everyone can read this in the April Glaspie memo. She was, there's the Iraqi version of it that was published in the New York Times, but then thanks to Julian Assange, we have the State Department version of the memo as well, where she says in no uncertain terms that we are slightly concerned about your military movements toward Kuwait. And gee, we really think that we would prefer if you wouldn't do something like that because we sure don't want to have a war with you, which was at the very best a mixed signal, a flashing yellow light to go ahead and invade. And Glaspie, and people can check me on this, Glaspie later told the New York Times, well, we didn't think he was going to take the whole country. He was supposed to just take the northern oil fields, break their legs, make them pay the price. But he got carried away and went all the way to the coast.
So we're again signaling, hey, you're our ally. Do what you have to do. Take over the oil fields. We're obviously being motivated by just wanting to potentially buy oil from him. What's the motivation there to keep supporting Saddam?
Well, so yeah, that's part of it. Is they, the oil majors in Houston, they get along fine with him. They don't care who's in charge as long as the oil's pumping. And I describe in the book, my best research on this is not deliberate, but the way it worked was the CIA and Central Command in the region were telling the Kuwaitis, you don't have to take this from Saddam Hussein. Tell them to piss off. While at the same time, the State Department was telling Saddam Hussein, you don't have to take that guff from them. Go ahead and break their knees. Meanwhile, at the Defense Department, and I'll give them credit, Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy Paul Wolfowitz was terrified and tried to stop it. And he convinced Secretary of Defense Cheney to convince Bush Sr. to send a letter to Hussein to try to stop it. But the letter wasn't worded strongly enough. So they tried to send another one, but it was too late. The troops were already rolling. So I don't think that they were deliberately tricking Saddam into doing this. It's essentially just the empire is too big and has too many different departments and they're not coordinated enough. So on one hand, we're telling the Kuwaitis to stick it to him. We're telling Saddam, you don't have to take that. And then the guys at the Defense Department who are alarmed and trying to stop it, they're too little too late to stop it. And once he invades, though, Colin Powell, who was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, announces that we decide as long as he doesn't move on Saudi Arabia, it'll be fine. And we've warned him, just don't you try to move on Saudi Arabia. But 3 days later, they changed their mind. So I'm getting too bogged down in the details here. I'll try to go faster. Margaret Thatcher from Britain says, no, you have to go because she's got investments in Kuwait and Kuwait has investments in British debt. And so it was British interest really that Thatcher accused Bush Sr. of being a wimp. She said, don't you go wobbly on me, Bush, meaning you can't be less of a man than me. And so he said, yeah, you're right. And so he said, this will not stand. And we're going to war. And then they spent the rest of 1991 refusing to negotiate. And they could have, because at that point they'd thrown down the gauntlet. Now they have to have a war. Now, your audience, everyone remembers Iraq War I, Desert Storm, the Gulf War, Yellow Ribbon, as this great success. Our space age technology versus their cavemen. Stabs, we can fly our missiles right down their chimneys and in their windows. It was actually only about 2% of the bombs dropped. But that's what they showed us on TV. These super smart bombs. And everybody thinks it was a great success. But here's the rub. This is why I'm telling this story. At the end of Iraq War I, Bush Sr. and his men encouraged the Shiites to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. Now, remember I said Saddam Hussein had invaded Iran 10 years before. But okay, Jimmy Carter gave him the green light, but why did he want to do it? Well, he wanted to do it because Saddam Hussein was a secular Sunni sitting on a Ba'athist dictatorship ruling over a supermajority Shiite population, 60% Shiite Arabs. All the land from Baghdad to Iran and down to Kuwait is predominantly Shiite. They were mixed, but it's predominantly Shiite territory. Another 20% of the Kurds in the north. And then the Sunnis are another 20%. And they were dominant. So Hussein was afraid when this Shiite revolution took hold in Iran, that the Shiite population of Iraq, they might now choose their religious sect over their nationality and their ethnicity as Iraqis and Arabs. And they might side with the Shiites in Iran and try to wage an Islamist revolution in Iraq. So that was why he started the war. So he could conscript them all and force them to go to war with Iran rather than against him. Okay. So now it's 10 years later. America's just invited him into Kuwait and forced him back out again. And now Bush and his men, Bush Sr. and his men encourage the Shiites to rise up and overthrow Saddam Hussein. Have you ever seen the movie Three Kings?
No.
It's got Ice Cube and Marky Mark and Clooney. And it takes place in the aftermath of the Iraq War. Some of your audience may have seen it. It's a gold heist. But that's the setting, is the aftermath. And what's happening is the Iraqis are crushing the Sunni insurgency and forcing the refugees into Iran. What happened? What happened was Bush encouraged them and he betrayed them. He left them high and dry like the Bay of Pigs to be stabbed in the back and killed. 100,000 of them were massacred. He let Saddam Hussein keep his tanks and his helicopters to put down the insurrection that he had encouraged. Wow. Why? The answer is because the Iraqis who had chosen Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq War and had defected to Iran and even fought for Iran in the Iran-Iraq War, they were now coming across the border from Iran to lead the revolution. They were about to get Baghdad to Tehran. And so they went, oh no, we just literally, the Bush Senior men were the same men who had run the Reagan administration. It was the successor administration under, Vice President Bush became President Bush. So other than Cheney, Baker and Powell and Eagleberger and Scowcroft, all of these men had been in the Reagan years. So they said, oh no, we just spent a decade supporting Saddam to contain the Iranian Shiite revolution. Now we're the ones importing it into Iraq. So they panicked and they called it off. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so Saddam crushed them. But then they said, oh no, well, we can't let him get away with that. So this became the excuse, Candace, then to stay. Now we have to have no-fly zones. Now we have to permanently enforce the blockade against Iraq. We'll never lift the sanctions until Saddam is gone because of his cruelty, and we have to continue to enforce the blockade and these no-fly zones in Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia. And that was the primary motivating factor for turning the Arab-Afghan army that America had sponsored in Afghanistan into wanting to attack the United States of America. They started attacking the United States in 1992 at a Radisson Hotel in, I forget if it was in Aden or in Sanaa, in Yemen. Then in 1993, they tried to blow up the World Trade Center the first time. That was essentially proto-Al-Qaeda. It was Egyptian Islamic Jihad. And yes, the FBI could have stopped it, but it wasn't just a sting that they made happen as we're used to. They just fumbled the ball when they could have been heroes and they blew it. But why were these terrorists even in the country? Because the CIA let them in. Because they're
I wish I could believe anything he says. This guy, I know him to be a liar, so he's untrustworthy, unfortunately. Definite things that I know the facts on the ground he has lied about. So this everything he's saying might be completely cocked. What do you call it? Cocked up, you, whatever.
friends of ours.
Maybe completely made up.
They helped us fight the war in Afghanistan.
Right.
We like these guys. Then they attacked and killed our National Guardsmen in Saudi Arabia in 1995, or pardon me, trainers trained the Saudi National Guard in 1995. Then they attacked the Khobar Towers, killed 19 American airmen, whose job it was to bomb Iraq from bases in Saudi. That was who was targeted. Bin Laden took credit for it. What did America do? They blamed it on Iran. They said it was Iranian-backed Shiite Saudi Hezbollah that did it. Yeah, right. It was bin Laden and his men who did it. And they were trying to send a message: get off of our holy Arabian Peninsula. Stop bombing and blockading Iraqis from bases on our holy peninsula. It's not just their country, but it's where their religion was born, Mecca, Medina, and all this. So that was the message. But they denied it to the American people that this is what's going on here. Oh, we could have just bombed. We could have had Tom Cruise just bomb them from the Navy in the Gulf. Do we have to have bases on the ground in Saudi Arabia? Bombing them from the Gulf is bad enough. But like just because the Air Force has to, the Navy has to share with the Air Force is why we're doing this. Why are we doing this? Right? Then they attacked the USS Cole in 2000 and eventually September 11th. Now this whole time, Bill Clinton is still backing these guys. He supports their side, not directly to them in the way of the Afghanistan war, but pretty.
So because one guy says that he objects to an American base, that's it? We should not have an American base? There's a government that we talk to the government. I mean, I don't understand this guy. This guy's like, one guy said, if I say that I don't want you to be an American citizen, so is that it? You're not going to be an American citizen? I don't understand this. So bin Laden is unhappy that there is American bases in wherever. Who cares what bin Laden says? There's a government. We deal with governments. What is this nonsense?
Pretty close. He's certainly backing their side in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. He's working with the Brits and the Saudis to back these mujahideen. And in the case of the Balkans, it's against the Serbs, who are the ethnic and religious kin and close allies of the Russians. By the way, they were the ones who fought on our side against the Nazis in World War II and rescued 500 downed American pilots, by the way. But the Balkan Wars, the Bosnia War, and then the Kosovo War of 1999, that was at the expense of the Russians. And they backed literal bin Ladenites in those wars, and then also in Chechnya.
So what we're seeing is just a trend over decades in which the United States is not getting their hands dirty, sending over weapons, supplies, money, funding these insurgents, and then suddenly deciding when they want to determine that they are actually terrorists, never mind, forget everything, and suddenly we pretend like we're the heroes because we're going to get rid of them after they've accomplished whatever it is they want to accomplish in the Middle East.
And then so back to September 11th for 1 second here. So you might remember the story of Colleen Rowley, who was the Time Magazine Person of the Year in 2002. She was an FBI lawyer at the Minneapolis office, and they got a call from a flight school. We have a guy here named Musawi. He wants to know how to fly a jumbo jet, but he's not.
So I don't understand. I mean, it was a good operation. The Mujahideen was a good American operation, right? Even this guy, what's his name, Scott Horton, even he agrees that that supporting the Mujahideen was brilliant. So, okay, I mean, I don't know. So yeah. You have to make up your mind. If you're happy with the Mujahideen, why are you unhappy with any other involvement?
I'm interested in how to take off or land. And he keeps talking about flying from Heathrow to New York. One of the FBI agents just speculated. This guy, I think, is trying to hit the World Trade Center. So the FBI agents asked their bosses in Washington, D.C., Michael Maltzby was one of them. I forget the other guy's name. May we please have permission to get a FISA warrant to search this guy's computer? Now, FISA warrant, as you know from the Carter Page episode and all the rest of this stuff, is a much lower standard of evidence than the Fourth Amendment probable cause to find evidence of a crime. All they have to do is say, Judge, we have reason to believe that this person is an agent of a foreign power or a foreign terrorist group. And they can rubber stamp, they can search whatever they want. They can go on a full fishing expedition, right? Well, the FBI asked the French, and the French said, we know this guy. Him and his brother are both recruiters for Al-Qaeda in Chechnya. So the Minneapolis office of the FBI said, the guy's a recruiter for Al-Qaeda in Chechnya. And they said, we like Al-Qaeda in Chechnya. Al-Qaeda and Chechnya aren't bad guys. They're not terrorists. Why? They're nationalists and patriots and freedom fighters. So from Saudi's connected.
Right, Al-Qaeda in Chechnya, well, Chechnya, that's the whole point of the Mujahideen, was to be anti-Russian, anti-Soviet, anti-communist. 1 second, I need to charge this phone. Let me see this battery. Yeah, it's good. Let me charge it. Beginning to charge.
To them, that's not good enough for a FISA warrant. Well, turns out, after September 11th, they still refused after the attack. They still refused until later that afternoon. The head of the CIA said, well, I want to know what's in that guy's computer. Tenet did. So finally, they gave him their warrant, and they opened his computer, and what they do? Immediately, they traced his contacts to the hijackers in Florida. They could have stopped the September 11th attack if it had not been for their sympathy for the bin Ladenites in Chechnya, and who were run by Khattab and Basiev, who were both Osama bin Laden's men.
I mean, I'm of the camp that I think 9/11 was a total false flag event, and it was because they wanted to go to war.
Let's see how he deals with her. Two nutcases, two conspiracy theorists bump against each other. Let's see how they deal with each other.
In the Middle East like never before.
I actually thought that before it happened, and now I don't.
You don't?
No, I don't. I really think that what they do is they think they're so smart, they create these Frankenstein monsters, and then they go crazy, and they don't have control of them. They can't protect us from the monsters that they create.
Yeah.
That's the simplest explanation. Every conspiracy theory. Oh, it's her home, so that's her. Oh, that's her. I didn't know. So she lost weight. I used to think she had fatter thighs. She must have lost weight. Oh, that's her house. She's the crazy Christian. That's probably her dad. That's maybe her husband, because he's a white guy. Okay. So he read War and Peace. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's just too many things that they ignored that day that just make no sense. And the things that they never really explained, like why Mossad was on the ground that day, like reporting things, questions that they won't answer, and they shut down. And then there's a clip of Bibi Netanyahu saying 9/11 was great for Israel. So all this stuff gets really weird.
He said that to the New York Times the day of.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just like they reported that they heard that somewhere. He said that in an interview with the New York Times. Yeah. It's very good.
Yeah, and there was another young woman as well who was Israeli on the ground. Like, this is very good for Israel, and that kind of tends to be a theme where we keep hearing that this is very good for Israel. We heard this last night. We had commentators coming out and celebrating this. That this is going to be really good for Israel, and that this is a great time to pivot into really Syria, because how does this now? We've kind of gotten into the back.
Well, the fact of the matter is, you could see how it's good for Israel that until that day, only Israel suffered from terrorism. And on 9/11, America suffered from terrorism. So you could see how, okay, now the Americans are going to understand the Israeli predicament. But in the long run, this did not, I don't think this worked out. Because terrorism works, and the Americans capitulated and succumbed to terrorism and became pro-Arab due to 9/11, I think.
Background. How?
Because of fear.
Does this lead up into Syria?
Okay, so in 1996, Richard Pearl and David Wormser and Douglas Feith wrote an important piece called A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. Well, they're all American neoconservatives. They wrote it for Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then the incoming prime minister of Israel for the first time in 1996. It was really Wormser, the principal author. He wrote a companion piece called Coping with Crumbling States, and then a book actually called Syria's Ally, embellishing the same thing. We've got to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Now, what I'm about to tell you sounds completely stupid and crazy. That's because it is. But here's the thinking, okay? It goes just like this. Israel wants to steal all of Palestine, but they can't because they got to deal with Hezbollah on their northern border, causing a problem.
Israel wants to steal all of Palestine? I don't even know what that means. But they can't because of Hezbollah? This guy's insane. Like, some facts I know. This is nothing to do with reality. Israel is not afraid of anything. And Israel doesn't want to steal Palestine. What is this nonsense?
Problem. They want to overthrow the Oslo Accord, the peace two-state solution deal. They don't want a two-state solution. They want peace.
What do you mean they don't want to? There was a government that voted in the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords, as far as I know, were never undone by any Israeli government. What do you mean the Israeli? I mean, the Israelis, it's a democracy, and they never voted for a government to nullify Oslo.
Through strength and dominance of all their neighbors. That's the clean break. We're throwing out Oslo. We're going full Likud. Okay? But we have a problem, which is Iran
What do you mean we're going full Likud? Likud is one party out of many. It's actually not a big party. It's not there's many parties in Israel, so what is he talking about? I don't know what universe is he talking about. This is what I'm saying. Everything he says is probably completely false.
Uses Syria to arm.
He's unreliable.
Hezbollah. Okay. And we have to break that chain. Syria is the keystone in the arc of Iranian power, of Shiite power. Now, the Assads are Alawites, which is separate. It's sort of a mix, but it's considered like an offshoot of the Shiites, and they're very close to the Shiites. And clearly we're allies with Iran, even though they were Baathists. They were allies with the Iranians. And it's true. We're the bridge, basically, between Iran and Hezbollah for arms shipments and so forth. But here's where it gets completely stupid.
It's physically a bridge. Syria connects physically Iran to Lebanon. It's a connection. It's a strategic connection.
David Wormser says, you know how to solve this problem? We got to get rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Secular Sunni Saddam Hussein. He's the roadblock in the Shiite crescent, the arc of Iranian power. He's the blocker. Why do you want to get rid of him? It's because they're stupid. And they believe the lies of an Iraqi exile named Ahmed Jalabi, who was just shining them on. He knew that they're loyal to Israel first, these neoconservatives. That's all they cared about.
So, we're going to get into Israel. We're going to have to cut to a quick ad because now we've got Bibi Netanyahu in the mix. Okay, so he sees, I want to take over Palestine. He has said this, and we're going to show clips because otherwise we'll call it anti-Semitic.
Netanyahu wants all of Palestine? Where are you getting this from?
Conspiracy theories, if you don't actually show Bibi Netanyahu in his own words.
Everything is not, it's not just lies, it's nonsense. Everything this guy says is nonsense. Completely. What's his evidence for all of this?
Being covered by the Israeli press. But first, guys, I want to show to one of our sponsors, Preborn, because we know that every baby's life is a precious gift. Our position in the highest, as abortion away, your tax gift will be doubled /Candace. That's fair to say. Like they're literally just obviously. Okay. So Bibi Netanyahu, Likud party, I would just say the neocons in America are just an extension of the Likud party. I think that's fair to say. Like they're literally just obviously loyal to the Likud party.
Let's just talk about that right now.
I don't want to accuse anybody of dual loyalty. I think they're loyal to Israel. Of course. You're not dual. You're just loyal to Israel at the expense of Americans dying, Christians dying. You are loyal to Israel. It's very clear. And
what does that even mean? She wants to simplify it. She wants to let's define the neocons or whatever. They support Israel. Period. Why? Why would you say that?
Bibi Netanyahu has a lot of minions here, a lot of minions throughout AIPAC, a lot of minions.
What's a minion?
The press, who essentially are now taking part in this leftist tactic of smearing and libeling people who are looking at this and going, this is ridiculous, right? You are arming militants, you are supporting militants, you're accusing us of being terrorist sympathizers when Bibi Netanyahu literally supported Hamas because he never was okay with the idea of a two-state solution. Skylar, do you actually have that screenshot from Haaretz?
Yes, this is true. That's true. So Netanyahu definitely supported financially the Hamas. Yes. That I agree with, but that's how is that related to anything else you said?
Of them covering Bibi Netanyahu's speech. I think I dropped it in there.
Netanyahu is a dumb leftist who pays his enemy to not attack him, like the ultimate loser.
It's just a
he has one of the most powerful armies in the world, and he just sends literally suitcases of cash to his literal enemies, hoping for another day of "don't kill me, please," like a little idiot.
Yeah, here it is. This is Haaretz, an Israeli publication, quoting Bibi.
Another concept implodes. Israel can't be managed by a criminal defendant. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. Netanyahu told his Likud party's Knesset members March 19, "This is part of our strategy. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas." So he said it, and that's obviously what he did. He wanted to create an enemy because this way he doesn't have to make peace. This is obvious. Yes, he is a loser and an idiot and a criminal. But how is this relevant to anything else you said?
Netanyahu, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestine state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. Netanyahu told his Likud party's Knesset members in March.
He should be tried for war crimes for everything that the Hamas government did, because it's his doing.
2019. This is part of our strategy. So you have this man, and this kills me, because now you have these neocons and these Judeo-Christians who are like, oh my gosh, like, how dare you say, like, they call us terrorist sympathizers. This man literally said, arm them, give them money. It's part of our strategy to block the idea of a two-state solution. He never wanted a two-state solution. He's on record saying he never wanted a two-state solution. He wants Palestine. Like that. Like, he's been very clear on the fact Gaza's got to go.
No, it's not that he wants Palestine. He just doesn't want a two-state solution. It's not that he wants Palestine. Okay, that's the misunderstanding. You're thinking that because he wants to thwart a Palestinian state, he wants Palestine. That's not that. That's not. Let's call it a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. Not necessarily.
West Bank has got to go. And so now you have this guy, he gets more power, and you're saying he's looking at this plan here. He's like, okay, well, a problem is Syria. Syria is a problem. By the way, guys, every single country that this man gets on a platform and tells America to invade, we invade. We invade. Like from Libya to Somalia to Iraq to anything that he says, we do. So he's got a lot of power, not just Israel, but also in the United States of America.
Absolutely.
He basically dictates, I would argue, our foreign policy in many ways.
And listen, I have to say, I appreciate the way that you use the term neoconservative narrowly there. People say neocon like it just means a conservative nowadays, or it means a hawk. But the neoconservatives are really like no more than 100 people. It's a very small group of essentially, yes, Israel firsters. And they came from the Trotskyite left. And part of being a Trotskyite in the kind of post-World War II era was...
Trotsky? What? Trotsky, the Russian communist?
Well, they hated Stalin because Stalin killed Trotsky. And plus, they were Americans. So it made sense for them to side with America in the Cold War. In fact, I brought you a present. This is Reclaiming the American Right by my mentor, Justin Raimondo, who is the founding editorial director of antiwar.com. And this is the history of the real American conservative movement that was supplanted by the neocons and how it was done. And you had essentially these few different avenues from Trotsky through the National Review, through the Social Democrats USA, through Leo Strauss and Albert Wohlstetter at the University of Chicago, through the Podhoritz's Commentary magazine.
Yeah, this is a complete conspiracy theory. This guy is insane.
And others. And these are basically the men who became what we call the neoconservatives.
Yeah.
The men who
they're not conservatives. They just infiltrated the true conservative
right.
first. Yeah, they're like this. And you now see that because on the topic of Israel, they behave like this. It's the exact same tactics of BLM, smearing, trying to ruin people's lives, calling for censorship. And you go, wait a second, you're not.
What?
conservative at all. How did you get here? Why do you have a platform? And we need to get these people out of our party immediately. We have absolutely no power and no platform. So now he's got a plan, and Syria has to go.
Right.
Assad is the president, and by the way, lived his life quite admirably. Was a dentist. This guy comes into power, and I want to show people this clip because it's so funny to hear about these evil dictator leaders through the lens of the mainstream media, which is controlled by too many of these trotskyites, in my opinion, on the conservative side. But I'm going to show you this clip, and I'm just going to read over it because obviously you guys might be able to understand it as he's speaking his language. This is what he said in 2020, addressing a group of clerics at the mosque in Damascus about neoliberalism. This is Bashar Assad, the evil dictator in which we just overthrew. Take a listen, and I will speak over it. Okay, so he's saying the basis, and talking about neoliberalism here, the basis of its methodology is to market the neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is based on promoting a total moral degeneracy and separate man from any principles, values, or beliefs for reaching his goals. And as an example of this process, modern liberals are those who marketed homosexuality and made gay marriage legal. They started in the 1970s, and now through marketing gradually until they were able to make it legal. And now they have children, but it's different from adopting because how can they have children? Modern liberalism has promoted the idea that the child does not get to choose his own religion by himself, and that there is therefore, it is against the child's freedom of expression, that the child must therefore choose his own religion when he's grown up, although this is a contradiction of human nature because ever since there were man-made gods and religion, a child would instinctively be attached to his family's heritage. Modern liberals contradict humanity themselves. I think it was in the last year or so, it has recently been reported that marijuana is not harmful, and now it's sold in shops legally. Drugs have now become not harmful, and now they're sold publicly, and later they will find something more harmful.
Didn't they discover that he was manufacturing drugs?
This is neoliberalism, and now claims that a child is born with neither male nor female gender, neither male or female because he gets to choose later on whether he is male or female. This is supposed to be a great thing, of course. So what are we to make of this? What we should understand is that neoliberalism targets our humanity, and it therefore contradicts with religion because religions serve humanity, while neoliberalism separates humans from their values. That's the evil dictator that we just armed militants, Israel armed militants. I'm going to show you guys that again. We're going to give you proof of that because otherwise we will be told that we are anti-Semitic. So actually, let's roll that clip now, Skylar. I'll tell you exactly which clip it is of the IDF minister, I think, admitting that we armed the Syrian rebels. Take a listen.
In a shocking change of policy, now former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot revealed on Sunday to the British Sunday Times newspaper that Israel has indeed been supplying weapons and funding to Syrian rebel groups in the Golan Heights. These claims have been made many times throughout the years, but this is the first time an Israeli official has confirmed such reports, and it came on the same day that Eisenkot admitted responsibility for striking, quote, thousands of targets in Syria as well. Until now, Israel has only ever discussed humanitarian aid shipments and programs like Operation Good Neighbor. Earlier this week, Prime Minister and Defense Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also broke with Israel's tradition of ambiguity in Syria by adding to Eisenkot's comments. He confirmed not only that Israel carried out hundreds of attacks against Iranian and Hezbollah targets, but also that Israel struck Damascus International Airport last weekend, a break from policy that at the time was considered just a campaign ploy. In his interview with the British Sunday Times, however, Eisenkot continued that the weapons shipments to rebel groups consisted of light munitions for self-defense, while a September report by Foreign Policy magazine quoted alleged Syrian rebel leaders and soldiers as saying Israel was arming and funding at least a dozen different groups to prevent Iranian and Iranian proxy forces from advancing southward. In fact, Foreign Policy wrote that Israel transferred assault rifles, machine guns, mortar launchers, vehicles, and more. That being said, rebel groups in the region still reportedly feel abandoned by Israel, both due to the lack of Israeli intervention during Assad's recapturing of Syrian territory and due to the discontinuing of Israeli military and humanitarian aid that followed.
Let's follow this up, Skylar. Let's pull in the Jerusalem Post headline of Israel. This is what they first try to say. We're treating the Al-Qaeda fighters. It's humanitarian. This is the Jerusalem Post. Israel treating Al-Qaeda fighters that are wounded in the Syrian civil war.
What year? 2015. Israel report Israel treating Al-Qaeda fighters wounded in Syria civil war. Nusra Front is the Sunni Muslim Al-Qaeda offshoot, which is currently fighting the Iranian-backed Axis of Bashar Assad and Hezbollah in Syria. These are good quotes. Yeah, this is correct. Israel, they probably trained them as well. That's my intuition.
And of course, like we just showed you, fast forward, and they admitted, we're arming them and we're helping them because it helps us. And so it's just amazing to see neocons today pretend like, it's a great thing that Assad fell, and now Israel's going to hit Syria because there's so many terrorists that we funded, that Israel funded alongside America. It gets me so angry. It really gets me so angry.
Well, remember what you said about America does with Netanyahu as well. It was Netanyahu who wanted America to go to Iraq. Now, W. Bush wanted to go to Iraq too, and Rumsfeld and Cheney had their own reasons. But it was Paul Wolfowitz and them saying, yes, sir, boss, we gained this out, and it's going to be great. You got to do it. But they were representing Benjamin Netanyahu's interest there. And interestingly, Ariel Sharon was the prime minister at the time. Netanyahu was his rival within Likud. But the neoconservatives in America, they were Netanyahu's guys. And even though Sharon hated Iran more, he eventually did get on board and helped lie us into war as well, into Iraq War II. Now, Iraq War II, I was going to say about the clean break. So the thinking in the clean break was, once America or Israel overthrows Saddam Hussein, then even though they have a supermajority Shiite population, they'll be dominated by us. They'll do whatever we say. And then they will force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran, which is completely crazy.
The intuition of a leader is that if you go to war against his enemy, you're going to weaken his enemy. And that's a good thing. So Netanyahu was recommending probably the US, go to war. I don't care against who. The whole region is the enemy of Israel. So he recommended a war against anyone in the Middle East, assuming that's a good thing, which, okay, so he's an idiot. Fine, I agree. He's an idiot, and war has its time and place, but there's better avenues or better avenues than war. But no one knows that. People know it's very easy to kill and destroy your enemy. it's very difficult to turn your enemy into a friend.
Crazy and stupid, and didn't happen. When they invaded, what did they do? They picked up right where Bush Sr. left off, and they brought the Shiite revolution all the way to Baghdad, led by the Iraqi traders who had chosen Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq War. Now it's 20 years later instead of 10, and these are the men that Bush puts in power. So your childhood there, your young adulthood there, where it's Iraq War II, 8 years of brutal fighting in Iraq War II, 2003 through 8 or 11, every count there. That was America fighting a civil war for Iran's side. Okay, so now picture your piece of paper. You got your ledger. On Iran's side is Tehran, them, and then Damascus and Hezbollah. Well, we just added Baghdad to their side of the ledger. Our alliance is the Sunni side, the Sunni kings of Arabia plus Turkey and of course Israel, right? So in other words, the neocons and George W. Bush, listening to the advice of Benjamin Netanyahu, scored a massive, what they call in soccer, an own goal for their regional rivals, the Iranians. So then they figured it out. And this is a great article, such an important
saying
article.
That's the real reason, Winter. You're correct. There's a clip of Bibi Netanyahu, which Skylar, you can let me know if you can find it when he gets in. He's the one that literally says they have weapons of mass destruction, and then all of a sudden our State Department is repeating, goes, you guys have got it invaded.
And it's going to cause positive reverberations throughout the region.
And there were no weapons of mass destruction.
No,
they were essentially giving the Americans.
I don't know. I mean, if Netanyahu said this, I mean, no, it's like the Americans didn't listen to Netanyahu. This is, I mean, what's your evidence that they just listened to Netanyahu? And he expressed his personal opinion, and the Americans did whatever they wanted. Maybe they did what he said, maybe they didn't. That's their choice. They are adults, they're not little babies. Anyway, it was obviously a mistake, because it was better when Saddam Hussein was fighting Iran, and they were keeping each other busy. That was actually pretty good. So yeah, it was a self-owned goal. So it was dumb. It didn't serve the purpose of the West. It served the purpose of Iran, this war in Iraq.
American public a reason that we once again had to get involved so that the Likud party could fulfill their goals. And what you said there, by the way, is really important. So I do want to say this. Even if the Likud party is not
How is this relevant to the Likud party? I'm lost.
empowering Israel, they are empowering the United States. That is what the neocon party is. It's the Likud, Likud party.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so
the Likud is the neocons. That's nonsense. That's just nonsense. I might as well say that the moon is the sun. Yeah, the moon is the sun. That's it. The moon is the sun. But that's what I want to say. There's nothing you can say against that. The moon is the sun. That's it. The moon is the sun.
But see, the thinking, Netanyahu and David Warren's just thinking here is just completely insane. That we're going to dominate the Iraqi Shia, and then they're just going to do whatever we want. And maybe we'll get a regime change in Iran, because the Iranians will want to live like Iraqis so much. And we'll
Let's see what else he said.
There was really an opportunity for it to succeed. It's just there was an opportunity for them to push back and maybe go a little halfway first to see how it worked out before they just decided to end apartheid completely and just turn into a direct democracy. Like that probably could have been done better. But Iran, I don't see it like that. I think the mullahs are not going to leave the power structure in Iran unless they're physically thrown out. What choice did the Americans have? They had a choice. They had Trump or Kamala Harris, and they made their choice. Okay, guys, I'm going to run, again, 25 minutes, I think, to a decent amount. I will be back for a longer show at 8 o'clock tonight. I'm looking very much forward to it. I don't know if I have a guest yet. I still haven't heard back from the two people that were supposed to come on. So if I don't have a guest, I'll have something set up, and I'll probably do more news content and more debunking content. But if you can, please donate to the show. It really does help me keep doing this and helps me buy the equipment I need to keep doing this. Have a great day and a great afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.
My fellow Americans, tonight I'm speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis in our southern...
We'll have Hezbollah will be eating out of Netanyahu's hand. This is total...
Oh, my God.
I have never seen, not once, a far-right figure experience a downfall because people were sternly and sincerely talking about how bad they are. Andrew Tate was at his height when everyone was like, he's really bad, he's a misogynist, he's...
Many other scientists is that they really don't want to talk to philosophers.
They don't.
And that's because they learned early on the feeling you get about him and many other scientists is that they really don't want to talk to philosophers.
They don't.
And that's because they learned early on that there are certain questions that they just don't want to address. Like if you ask Leonard Susskind, look, the fundamental equations of physics, dynamics of physics, they're temporally symmetric, aren't they, Leonard? He'd say, yeah. But look around the world. We never see people coming out of their graves and growing younger. We never see ice cubes forming out of warm water. Our world is all full of temporal asymmetries. Just what grounds that? Where does that come from? But physicists don't really like to get into this very much or really delve into it in a way that really gets at the bottom of it.
Philosophy episodes with some of our friends like David Albert and Tim, and I was really looking forward to doing one on the philosophy of science with you. But first, something I always find funny is that when I tell non-philosophers that I'm interested in philosophy of math or philosophy of physics, they always give me this incredulous stare because they know what math and physics are.
Obviously, he's gay. You can tell by the mustache.
But
they had no idea there was such a thing as philosophy of math or philosophy of physics. And I have the sense it's the same for philosophy of science. So I want to start just by asking you what science is, what philosophy of science is, and how they're different, how they overlap.
It's a really interesting question because, of course, there are many, many activities that people engage in: art, music, mathematics, physics, and philosophers come along and they make philosophies of these things. What are they doing making philosophies of these things? So philosophers sort of ask foundational questions. In the case of science, the question is, well, what is science anyway? I mean, scientists don't investigate the question, what is science? They do things like find out, what mitochondria are, or something like that, or what are the amino acids there are. But they don't investigate what is the nature of science. Investigating the nature of science, well, that's something that can be done by different fields. Sociologists can be interested in it because it's a sociological thing. Historians can be interested.
Economists.
Because it's the history of science. But philosophers can be interested in it. It's a kind of the idea. Philosophers are particularly interested in normative kind of questions. What are scientists aiming to do? What are scientists after? So philosophy of science is characterizing what science is in general, and then a lot of subsidiary questions develop within science. So within science, ideas have developed over the history of science. For example, the one that I'm most interested in is the idea of the law of nature. Now, the idea that there are laws really wasn't part of the way people thought about things until sometime in the 17th century. I don't mean there wasn't anything like it before, but there was. The Greeks and the Romans and Chinese and Indians had some idea like that. But the idea that there are mathematical principles to describe how things move, how planets, pendulum, projectiles, and so on move, that only really took root in the 17th century. The central figures, of course, are Galileo, Descartes, Newton. And so the question is, what is a law of nature? That's a philosophical question. Scientists will go and tell you what laws of nature there are, but they won't tell you what laws of nature are. In fact, can I go on a little bit more?
Yeah, please.
I mean, the way I got into philosophy, when I was an undergraduate at Amherst College, longer ago than I care to reveal right now, I was taking a course in physics, a course in statistics, and a course in biology, and the notion of probability, concept of probability came up in all those courses. And they didn't seem to be talking about exactly the same thing in each of these courses. They kept asking, what is that? What is probability? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? And so finally, I think it was the guy in the physics department said, go to the philosophy department. So I went to the philosophy department, and that's how I ended up majoring in philosophy. And so I spent most of my career trying to come up with an answer to that question and related questions. What exactly is the nature of objective probability and subjective probability and so on? Maybe we want to talk about that later. I don't know.
It's funny, as soon as I asked you the question, what is science, what is philosophy of science, I realized that asking what is science is itself, or it can be itself, a philosophical question. And I'm wondering then if you think it might be fair at all to think of philosophy of science as meta-science in some way, like an abstraction from science, and what philosophy of science might have in common, or how it might be dissimilar from
the method.
I would say it's a sociology sociological phenomenon. So it's a question in sociology. We noticed a group of people displaying a behavior known as scientists, and now we're curious about observing their behavior. Just like an anthropologist would go visit hunter-gatherers, a tribe, and take notes and study everything about them. So too, a sociologist or an economist or a Scientologist, and it's not a good name, a scienceologist would study scientists and how they behave in their daily routines.
Methods of philosophers of science can overlap with the methods of science. So I, in fact, think that the way philosophy of science should be pursued.
Before you talk about the method of science, you need to talk about the social phenomenon known as a scientist.
It's sort of seamlessly with science. And that I'm in a tradition that follows, I guess, the great American philosopher of science, in my view, is Willard Quine.
You can view the scientists as a tribe, as a human tribe.
So philosophers of science are interested in giving explanations at the most foundational and general level, using something like methods of theoretical science, inference to the best explanation, things like that. But philosophy of science is not an empirical. You don't do experiments in philosophy of science.
If this is leather, this is a very expensive couch. And this piece of wood, I think, if this is wood, I mean, this guy obviously is gay.
There are philosophers who are interested in doing so-called experimental philosophy, but that's a whole other can of worms, so to speak, or can of something which you don't open. But so it's not the same as it's doing science. I know, because I also was going to at one point be a biochemist, and I practiced some science and published a couple of things in biochemistry. There's an unknown fact.
Yeah. I thought I had your timeline all figured out.
So I have some idea. I mean, I wouldn't really say I am a scientist or could do science now, but I have an idea about what goes on, really. And of course, I study physics. I know what goes on in physics, but not as experimentalist. If you were to put me into a laboratory, you would want to get me out of there as soon as you can.
Yeah, you kind of have a mad scientist look, especially with the sunglasses.
I'm not angry at anybody, actually.
And maybe a happy mad scientist. Well, I think it would be nice to start with some of the classical questions in the philosophy of science. One of the major ones that comes to mind is, I guess it I've already asked this, what is science? But more particularly, how do you contrast science with pseudoscience, and how has this been done historically?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I'm not sure that I have anything so incisive to say about it. I've been interested in, I've even taught a course on science and pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience is very bad. I would say there is a spectrum of good science and bad science. And what you might want to call pseudoscience, I would just call bad science.
So, of course, science has a lot of prestige, allegedly. At least they get the grants. So there are people who want to do science but don't know the first thing about doing science. They invent something that they want to get the money for, or at least want to get the prestige for. And it's really pseudo, and it's not the real thing. Let's think, what's a really good example of a pseudo?
Of pseudoscience?
Pseudoscience.
Well, the obvious examples, I mean, I was thinking of Popper when I asked this question. I had in mind astrology, perhaps, or, I mean, for Popper, I understand psychoanalysis or Marxism might have also counted as pseudoscience, but maybe we ought to...
Psychoanalysis? Oh my God, what's wrong with psychoanalysis? What the heck is wrong with psychoanalysis? But that's Popper's go-to example. It's so bizarre.
to stick with astrology.
Astrology is straightforward.
Wait, what was the other one?
Examples. I mean, I was thinking of Popper when I asked this question. I had in mind astrology, perhaps, or, I mean, for Popper, I understand psychoanalysis or Marxism might have also counted as pseudoscience, but maybe...
Marxism, yeah, I would say Marxism is bad science, yeah.
We ought to stick with astrology.
Astrology is a straightforward example. I mean,
but Erhard, that's a German name. He looks German, Erhard. So he interviewed Professor Richard Wolff, who is a self-proclaimed Marxist. So now you know that Popper or whatever said that. I would never think to say this, that Marxism is a false science or a pseudoscience. But so how could you interview Wolff and not ask him about that? I watched the entire Wolff interview. He didn't bring it up.
I have known astrologers. A very good friend of mine. Someone...
A woman.
A little side. You can edit, right?
Yeah, I can edit. But
Okay.
I just want you to know,
George Ray. Have you done George Ray?
pretty much every time you're going to tell me to cut something out.
A man believes in astrology. That's weird.
I know it's going to be funny, so I'm
No,
gonna,
this is not going to be. You know George Ray?
no.
He's somebody you should do. His stepfather was an astrologer, a pretty well-known astrologer. So
Okay, well-known astrologer. I'm not up on the greatest.
George Ray's a philosopher, a very prominent philosopher of psychology and philosopher of mind. He's in Maryland. He's a little sick right now, so I don't know if you get him to do anything. But... So let's see. So astrologers claim that by examining where the positions of the planets and the stars were at various times when you were born, or when you had your bar mitzvah, or something like that.
Oh my God, that's funny.
That they can tell you things about your personality, your nature, who you want to marry, and things like that. Now, these claims are wild. There's no real understanding, real theoretical backing for why this should be the case. Why should, when you were born, have anything to do with what your personality is about, where the planets are doing? The planets don't affect your personality in that way. Furthermore, if you subject claims by astrologers, if they make really clear claims, often they don't make clear claims. The claims are vague, so that they can they can say they really didn't get it wrong because they didn't really mean that, or something like that. But to the extent they can be pinned down, they just don't pass the test. So one of the things about science is that scientists try to put forward, or they should try to put forward, clear hypotheses. And this is a good thing about Popper. Popper emphasized this, that scientists should put forward clear hypotheses, which have clear predictions, and then subject them to severe tests. I think that's a good part about Popper. He just went overboard with that.
Well, maybe we should talk a bit more about Popper.
That's interesting. He says Popper went overboard with that. That is a curious accusation.
Because he's crucial to most introduction to the philosophy of science courses. Maybe falsification and its role in his...
To severe tests. I think that's a good part about Popper. He just went overboard with that.
Well, maybe we should talk a bit more about Popper, just because he's crucial to most introduction to the philosophy of science courses. Maybe falsification and its role in his philosophy of science might be something worth covering.
Okay, so let's see. I'll try not to be too glib about this. When I first started teaching, I had a colleague who was a Popper experienced student, and in the department that I was teaching, then I got to be known as the Popper Stopper.
The Popper Stopper, I like that.
The Popper Stopper. Oh my God.
Popper went just too far. He oversimplifies many things in my view. On the other hand, I think it was very good. It was a good event that he was there and it happened, and he
This is great. Pushback against someone so famous. That should be great. Let's see.
It's clear about things. I think it was a very good thing that he was there. So Popper was famous for putting forward a view called falsificationism, the idea that scientists should put forward theories or claims about the world and then attempt to falsify them, and that you can never confirm a hypothesis according to Popper or some parts of Popper. So he modified this at certain points. So you should never say you have good reason to think that this is closer to the truth than that. Well, he did try to develop a conception of closer to the truth, actually, which is one of the interesting projects that you might do in philosophy of science. And this was very influential idea. I mean, that's very important. It influenced one place we want to follow up. It influenced a whole way, or it's very much connected to a whole part of the way statistics is done. And statistics is very important in doing science. And I don't know if you want to get into this later, but now there's something going on called the statistics war. So it's been going on for a while. The wars have been starting up again, apparently, from some emails I've gotten recently.
Oh, yeah. Well, probability is certainly on my list for a topic that we need to get to, especially in conjunction with something you've already mentioned, which is laws of nature. But you're right that I would like to hold off on that for a little while.
About Popper in this. So I was very much brought up at the graduate school I went to, one that you know about well at Stanford. One of my teachers was Patrick Supi, so I'm sure has a big influence. You guys been
he still does
for a while. As a Bayesian, I learned about the approach to understanding scientific inference via something called Bayes' theorem, and that also can be oversimplified a lot. And maybe we want to talk about that a little bit more later on. But when I first started doing philosophy,
brilliant. So he's going to push back against Bayesianism. That's terrific.
Of science at the department I was at then, it was sort of Bayesians versus Popperians. I'm not sure this is even the way anybody would think about things nowadays, but in fact, I edited an edition of Synthesis.
This is brilliant.
I think, well, it's the very first thing I did, I think, in philosophy, Bayesians versus Popperians. And basically, Bayesians thought of scientific inference as scientists start out with certain degrees of belief or amounts of confidence in various hypotheses. They then do experiments, they get evidence, and they update the degrees of belief in accordance with certain rules, which seem to follow from principles of rationality, which we can talk about why they make sense.
Wow, this is brilliant. He's actually analyzing methods of analysis. This is absolutely brilliant.
Popperians really didn't like this. And so that was what the fight, principles of rationality, which we can talk about why they make sense. Popperians really didn't like this. And so that was what the fight was over in those days. And in fact, in statistics, the two approaches to statistics, the broad approaches to statistics, I'm always simplifying, are so-called orthodox or significance testing on the one hand and Bayesian on the other hand. And really, that's kind of like a following of the dispute between Bayesians and Popperians in philosophy of science.
Before we move on from Popper, there are two specific things I'd like to get your takes on, even though they might not fall.
So he has an earring
under the philosophy of science. One is, with regard to falsification, you probably know I've done a number of episodes on string theory with some very famous string theorists like Leonard Susskind or von Maldacena. And one of the major criticisms of string theory, which for our listeners who might not be familiar with string theory, in a nutshell, that's obviously much, much more complicated than this. String theory reimagines the point particles and fields of quantum field theory as tiny one-dimensional oscillating strings along with some other sort of fundamentalia. But what people allege is that it's unfalsifiable, in part because there are currently no conceivable experiments that could be run to test it. And what I am wondering is whether or not you think, a la Popper, that this should preclude us from viewing string theory as science.
So the two reasons that something might be unfalsifiable. One is that it's the theory itself is so developed so that no conceivable experiment.
Thanks for qualifying my word conceivable. But I mean, you used it much better than I did. I should have said no practical experiment can be done.
No conceivable experiment could falsify it. If that is really the case, then it's not science. But if there's no experiment that can be done now, they can't falsify it. That doesn't mean that if you work on the theory and you develop things and develop new technology and so on, you couldn't falsify it. There are all sorts of hypotheses in cosmology that can't be falsified now. They're very interesting and important, and there were ones at times which couldn't be falsified and later were able to be falsified, or I'm not sure verified is the right word, but they passed tests, falsification tests. So that's a very important distinction. As far as I know, important, and there were ones at times which couldn't be falsified and later were able to be falsified, or I'm not sure verified is the right word, but they passed tests, falsification tests. So that's a very important distinction. As far as I understand, I'm no expert in string theory. I understand it to an extent, but no expert in it, far from it. There's a problem within the foundations of physics that's super, super important. And that is that the two basic fundamental theories, one really fundamental theory, that's quantum field theory. And then there's an account of space-time that's general relativity. And it's basically the theory within cosmology is mostly done and stuff in astronomy where strong gravitational fields are involved. But it's definitely the structure of space-time. But these theories do not fit together very well. And it's a question of how to make them compatible with each other. And there are a number of ideas floating around.
It's not just that the general relativity is not compatible with quantum mechanics. It's that general relativity is not a quantum mechanical theory. So it's not a local theory. Maybe that's not the problem. The problem is that it's not a mechanical theory. It's not a quantum mechanical, therefore it's not a mechanical theory. It doesn't involve particles. So it's ethereal.
Have you done Carlo Rovelli, actually?
I'd love to speak with Carlo.
I mean, quantum mechanics has its issues, but it's much more closer to intuition.
Carlos is going to be around starting in October.
Oh, really?
Going to be around. But these theories do not fit together very well. And it's a question of how to make them compatible with each other. And there are a number of ideas floating around. Have you done Carlo Rovelli, actually?
I'd love to speak with Carlo.
Carlos is going to be around starting in October.
Oh, really?
Doing a bunch of lectures at Princeton, right? So his approach, not string theory, but different kind of approach, and a number of other ideas are around. And I think at this point, this is such a tough, difficult, interesting problem. Let people think about it. I mean, it would be ridiculous for someone to say, stop thinking about it because you can't falsify it now. And if there are people who say that, screw them.
Yeah, entirely inclined to agree with you on this point, even if there might be other good criticisms of string theory. I don't think falsification is the way to go. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, just because out of intellectual interest, I've done a number of episodes on the show about Marxism. And since Marxism is one of Karl Popper's pet peeves, this again isn't necessarily related to the philosophy of science, but as a philosopher of science, how do you feel about Marxism?
I'm afraid I have a lot to say about that.
Oh.
The first thing that comes to mind is a philosopher whom I knew personally. And
I'm going to assume that this guy is a Marxist. I'm assuming both of these guys are Marxists. They're both like into academia, which is basically a socialist. So both of these guys are socialists.
when you talk to David knew him much better than me, actually, but he's one of the most important figures in the history of contemporary philosophy. He's published almost nothing. This is Sidney Morgenbesser. I'm sure you've heard about him.
Absolutely.
And when Marx comes up, Morgenbesser's famous remark about Marx comes to mind, which is that up until now, people have studied Marx. The time has come to change him.
I've heard Morgenbesser had a lot of really good lines.
Many.
The time has come to change them, the people who studied Marx.
Up until now, people have studied Marx. The time has come to change him.
I've heard Morgenbesser had a lot of really good lines.
Many. Too bad he's not around for you to interview. He'd be the best I ever knew about. He used to call me up once in a while. I didn't know the person when I mentioned before I got into philosophy when I was at Amherst. The teacher I had who was a philosopher, a guy you probably never heard of, Joe Epstein, who actually was a friend of Pat Supi's. Incidentally, one of the things about philosophy is you get to know a lot of great people in philosophy, really interesting people. I'm sure you've noticed this because you've gone everywhere to get to know them. I never had any idea when I was a little student at Amherst College. I get into such a fantastic field and get to know so many interesting people. So Epstein was my teacher there. Was also a co-student with Sidney Morgenbesser, who was a co-student with Pat Supi's too. I don't know if you knew that or not in Columbia. So I didn't know Morgenbesser early on. I got to know him when I moved back to New York, and David knew him a little bit, and I got to know him through David. And Morgenbesser knew that I was a guy he could call up and bend my ear on the phone. So he'd call me up from time to time. And every once in a while, my wife would say, Barry's not here, because she knew I'd be on the phone for an hour. Anyway, so Morgenbesser had a lot of great statements. Ask David about more. We could spend the hour just like
yeah. Let's get back to Marxism, and you don't have to say all you have to say on it.
Okay. My wife, who I just mentioned now, she's from Budapest. Her family were communists. At one point, parts of her family were those Holocaust survivors. I mean, it's a long story. You don't go into that. But they also became anti-communists, and so she was brought up. She was born after '56, but she was her uncle was one of the leaders of the '56 rebellion. He had to leave Hungary. He lives in Paris. Now he's still alive in '98. So she was brought up on sort of the Soviet-style thing until the early 1980s when communism fell. So she really hates that stuff. And she went to Karl Marx University. And when I visited her, when I first got to know her, and I went and sort of fell for each other there, she took me to Karl Marx University, and there was a bust of Karl Marx in the middle of there. And of course, knowing me, what do you think I did? I separated it from where it was, and I turned it upside down and put it on his head.
That's a very, very thing. Okay, that tells me all I need to know.
Anyway, I don't know really what Karl Popper has to say about Marx. I know he
So he's anti-Marxist. He put the Karl Marx sign upside down?
Of course, knowing me, what do you think I did? I separated it from where it was, and I turned it upside down and put it on his head. So she really hates that stuff. And she went to Karl Marx University. And when we went...
She influenced him. She saved him.
When I visited her, when I first got to know her, and I went and we sort of fell for each other there, she took me to Karl Marx University, and there was a bust of Karl Marx in the middle of there. And of course, knowing me, what do you think?
Oh, a bust. He put the bust upside down. Awesome.
I think I did. I separated it from where it was, and I turned it upside down and put it on his head.
That's a very, very thing. Okay, that tells me all I need to know.
Anyway, I don't know really what Karl Popper has to say about Marx. I know he dumped on it a lot, because that was always in the air when he was writing. I think now, it's in the past, I think Marx had many interesting things that should be studied and thought about more seriously now.
One last quite general question about science and the philosophy of the same is scientific realism. What is this debate of scientific realism?
So there's a debate within philosophy of realism versus idealism or various other things that are modifications of realism. For a while, Hillary Putnam held something that's called internal realism, or so we need realism, I don't know, something like that. And then there's a debate between scientific...
Wait, realism and anti-realism?
Within philosophy of realism versus idealism or various other things that are modifications of realism. For a while, Hillary Putnam held something that's called internal realism, or so we need realism, I don't know, something like that. And then there's a debate between scientific realism or something called constructive empiricism and scientific realism. Full-throated scientific realism say what scientists are aiming at is finding out what the world is really like. I don't know why you want to be a scientist unless that's what you want to do. Scientific realism or something called constructive empiricism and scientific realism. Full-throated scientific realism say what scientists are aiming at is finding out what the world is really like. I don't know why you want to be a scientist unless that's what you want to do. Unless you want to be one of the tech guys in Palo Alto and you just want to get rich, then you might want to be a scientist. So I think if you're interested in science, you want to know what is the world really like. And the next question is, can you actually find out what the world is really like? Well, I think that if you look at the history of science, it's reasonable to say that scientists have found out what the world is really like, or close to really like, to a large extent. For example, at one point, it was not really clear that the world was made up out of little things with lots of degrees of freedom, got to be called atoms now, elementary particles or something like that. I now think that that's the case. In some sense, it's made up out of. I mean, maybe that's not at the very bottom of the story, but there definitely are atoms and molecules. I've even seen molecules in a microscope, so not that that's the test, but So I think we found out more about what the world is really like. We found out that the Earth really moves, that the moon moves around the Earth, that the Earth moves around the sun. So scientists have found out what the world is really like. So scientific realists think that the scientists should aim to do that and can succeed to its extent. Whether it could succeed entirely, that's an open question. So-called constructive empiricists, and the famous name there was a very important, significant figure, Lars von Frosten.
Who I've spoken with on the show.
Yeah, he's great, significant. He, for a while, held, I don't know where he is right now about this, but I haven't seen him in 10 years or so. And he held that all science should aim to do is to find out what you would see if you were to do experiments of various kinds. And I think science should aim for that. But the reason you should aim for that is you should find out what the world is really like. And finding out what you see when you do experiments of various kinds tells you something about what the world is really like.
So are you a scientific realist? Do you believe that science can tell us what the world is really like? Yeah. What is the best argument that you've heard for us not being able to believe that science can in principle tell us what the world is really like? Maybe in particular about unobservable entities like water molecules or strings or something like that. We can never get to the bottom of it.
Well, there's an idea that you should only believe in what you can see. Now, I'm very nearsighted, so this would be very limited to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I assure you I exist.
Okay. I'm often unsure about myself, but glad to hear that you exist. But I think that's ridiculous. We can also believe in things we hear about. And, I mean, just when you understand what it is to be a human being, we know that we couldn't even believe in what we see unless we believe about
Who's moving the camera? There's a cameraman?
a lot of other things too. Okay, because we only see the front sides of things. We believe things have back sides too. Okay. And so I think, and one of the, in the 50s and 60s, there was a whole discussion about whether there can be a sharp distinction between what's observable and what's not observable. I think there isn't a sharp distinction between them, and the notions are not that clear, and they're really notions that should go into psychology. They should be studied by psychologists. Anyhow, so I think the idea that you should only believe what you can see is a really bad argument for not being a scientific realist. The argument for not being a scientific realist, which has a little bit of strength, I think, is that scientists have often made mistakes.
Is this the argument about the pessimistic meta-induction?
Yeah.
Could you explain what that is and what those words are? I think that might be interesting for our listeners.
I wish I had a good line to say about pessimist and optimist. I think a little bit something will come to mind. But
Norman Finkelstein yesterday said something interesting about Noam Chomsky, which kind of relates, not really, but he said that Chomsky was not a glass half empty or half full kind of guy. He was just the glass is empty. I thought that was funny.
Oh, I see. I've met people who said, "Where's the glass?"
Oh, that's a good one too. The pessimistic meta-induction. What does meta-induction mean?
Okay. So the idea is you're doing an induction, just an induction.
What's an induction?
Okay, an induction is you got some evidence, just in conclusion of the evidence. The conclusion
Good. This guy is not afraid to ask questions. That's good.
doesn't follow with logic validity from the evidence, but you somehow thinks that the evidence provides reason to believe the conclusion. Now, when induction is good and when it's bad, that is one of the most fundamental and important questions in philosophy and philosophy of science. We can come back to that. That's really Hume's problem and Goodman's paradox. Fascinating and interesting things for discussion. I don't know if we want to get into that or not, but I'm quite interested in both those things. So that's what induction is. It's pessimistic because, with respect to scientific realism, you should think that the evidence we have is that scientists have come up with lots of proposals for what the world is like, and later it's shown that they're wrong. So maybe anything we come up with, the conclusion that the induction is supposed to lead to, is anything scientists ever come up with is going to be wrong. But I think that's a completely mistaken inference here. First of all, the things that they come up with, while they're shown to be wrong, they're shown to be wrong in places, but right for the most part. So, for example, the early quantum theory was wrong, but it had a big part that was right that led to better quantum theory. Newton's, to make the most famous example, Newton's classical mechanics isn't right, but Newton said that he was standing on the shoulders of others so he could see further. Now, I don't know that anybody would have the gall to say that standing on Newton's shoulders. Those shoulders are too high up to get to.
Yeah.
Okay. But certainly in some sense, the one person who could say that would be Albert Einstein. And he certainly was doing that. Okay. So while Newton was wrong, he was on the right track. So Popper noticed this too. You know Popper earlier, and he wanted to come up with the idea that, well, theories that people have come up with have been falsified. Maybe they were approximately true. And he tried to come up with an account of when a theory, or it doesn't have to be anything as fancy as a theory, just a claim, a view, is not true, but it's close to being true. That's a really interesting idea. Popper used the word verisimilitude for that. There have been attempts to come up with more precise and formal accounts of verisimilitude. Some of them are better than others. I'm not sure I'm really on top of that literature right now, but that's an interesting project because we certainly have an idea of when, we certainly think that if we watch two debaters, I think both of them are saying a lot of false things. I won't name names because we're not in a political discussion now, but in a recent debate, I would say one of them was a lot further from the truth than the other one.
Yeah. I have the sense, maybe we've spoken about it before, that you knew Hillary Putnam, who's another big titan in 20th century philosophy, and another titan who is quite connected to this debate about scientific realism.
Yes.
You know what I'm going to ask you? I'm going to ask you, the pessimistic meta-induction is an important argument for the scientific anti-realist, but another argument, this one that is in favor of the scientific realist, is the no miracles argument, and that is attributed to Hillary Putnam. So I want to ask you about that one.
Yeah, okay. And afterwards, if you want, I can tell you a story about Hillary Putnam.
You don't want to do it on the air?
Well, it can be on the air because almost nobody knows the story. I'm going to tell you.
Okay, great.
And since I'm going to retire soon, that I'm left knowing that almost no one knows the story.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
For our listeners, Hillary Putnam really is one of the huge titans.
He's one of the great philosophers. The great philosophers now are thought to be, I believe, Saul Kripke, David Lewis, and Willard Quine. Maybe there's some other names you want to throw in, Wilfred Sellers. And Putnam is up there, but I think Putnam should be right up there with those at the very top, in my own view. And Sellers should be too. The problem with Putnam is he changed his mind often about things and said he did. He was very strong. Some of the things he wrote about certain areas, like in quantum mechanics, he was a little bit screwed up about. David, I don't know if you know this, that David was the source in quantum mechanics. So scientists have come up with theories. They look like they're right. Their experimental results are right. I mean, take some examples. Genetics is an example of that. When it first came up, people didn't know anything about genes. When Mendel was coming up with his account of inheritance, nobody knew what DNA was or anything like that. It took a while for people to develop that. It would be a miracle to think that someone could come up with this theory and for it to work out the way it did if it weren't on the right track. Okay, that's the no miracles argument, and surely Putnam is right about that. Putnam was a scientific realist, but he was not a full-blown philosophical realist. That's maybe for a metaphysics discussion, not for now. Here's a story about Putnam. So I wasn't a student of Putnam's, and I knew him a little bit before, but I only really got to know him because I spent a summer seminar that he ran in 1986 or 7 or 8, I don't remember exactly the year. And I got to know him quite well in a summer seminar. We hung out a lot, and I learned a lot from him. I really think I absorbed my philosophical views as much from him as from anybody, or I didn't realize it at the time. So here's the story. It's a story about how I almost killed Hillary Putnam.
Oh my God.
Like I said, you may want to edit it out of this. So in Boston Harbor, I got into the habit. You can rent these boats. I used to go kayaking in my youth, and now I'm sure I couldn't do it a little bit, but you can rent these boats, which are kind of like kayaks. I think they're called wheelies. They're much bigger.
This is starting to sound like an attempted murder in Boston Harbor late at night.
Right. I wasn't murder, I guarantee you. It wasn't nothing intentional.
Is the statute of limitations up on this?
But I didn't want to kill him. I think he was a great human being, actually. To the extent I knew him. I mean, I wouldn't say I know him really, really personally, but I knew him from this thing. And so I told him about this, that I was going on. He said he wanted to go out on a wheelie because he hadn't done this in one of these boats. So I took him out on the boat. We went on the boat. You rented them in the harbor. We were going out a little ways, and he decided to stand up. But you can't stand up in a wheelie because what happens if you stand up?
Tips.
It tips, it capsizes. So he fell into the Boston Harbor. So I had to fish him out of Boston Harbor. If I didn't fish him out, he wouldn't have made it.
It's a good thing that you were there and you didn't have ill will for Hillary Putnam.
So that's the story.
The last thing, since we've already talked about string theory, which I find quite fascinating, I know that a lot of philosophers don't think the time is right yet to be doing philosophy of string theory, or they think the time is past because string theory is dead and we shouldn't really be doing philosophy of string theory at all. But there is a relevant question related to scientific realism. So I've spoken with Tim Maudlin plenty of times on the show. He says we're not getting rid of H2O. One way or another, no matter what happens with science, it's almost impossible that water as H2O is going anywhere. But he certainly wouldn't say the same thing about strings. He would say either he's very certain the world is not composed of strings or stringy things, or if anything, it is very far from certain that the world is composed of stringy things. I'm wondering if there is a criterion or some set of criteria that you as a philosopher of science or philosophers of science in general would use to
What's the evidence for the strings? There's no evidence.
make this distinction of when we want to accept an unobservable entity or class of entities, accepting the caveat that unobservable is maybe a nebulous term, into our ontology of what the world is like.
I wouldn't look for a criterion for such a thing. It's you sort of got to be on the ground and see what's going on in the field. I totally agree with Tim about H2O. If there's not a worldwide drought, H2O is here to stay. So,
okay.
We don't have H2O. String theory, it's not clear enough. And I think the reason that philosophers, there aren't very many philosophers think about it, is because it's hard to learn about it. I've attempted to read some of the work in string theory. Brian Greene is another guy in New York. I don't know if he does interviews or not, but he's a string theorist guy. I've heard him talk about it. I think to get into the mathematics of it the mathematics is very, very difficult and fancy. That's why philosophers are not doing it. I think it's just hard.
There are some philosophers who are doing it. Jeremy Butterfield, Sebastian DeHaro, Nick Huggett, your student Craig Callender. There are a lot of yeah. Another topic in the philosophy of science worth approaching, and mind you, we're going to get to natural laws, to probability, to your cup of tea, is fundamentalia and what is fundamental entities, fundamental theories. But maybe this is
that's genius. Just the very definition of what is fundamental, just the definition. That's good.
Good place to ask, because fundamentalia also has a metaphysical ring to it, and there are lots of debates within metaphysics about what fundamentality even is, if it is a univocal term at all. What is fundamentalia? But first, how do philosophy of science and metaphysics interact or connect? You're smiling. Is that because it's a good question?
It's a really good question.
Okay.
And it's something really central question.
Is fundamentalia, but first, how do philosophy of science and metaphysics interact or connect? You're smiling. Is that because it's a good question? If it is a univocal term at all. Debate within metaphysics about what fundamentality even is, if it is a univocal term at all. What is fundamentalia? But first, how do
univocal
philosophy of science and metaphysics interact or connect?
What is metaphysics?
You're smiling. Is that because it's a good question?
It's a really good question.
Okay.
And it's something really central question. So I think people in metaphysics divide up into those who think that metaphysics is its own subject and science is something there, but you do metaphysics.
What is metaphysics?
It's based on intuitions and a history of metaphysics and maybe theology, I don't know, something like that. And there are those who think that really all metaphysics is understanding what the world must be like for science to be a successful enterprise. That's my view. Now, I might go a little bit further than that, because I think there are other enterprises that people engage in, like art and music, and you might wonder what the world must be like, or what human beings must be like, really, in those cases, more than the world, or reality must be like for those to be successful enterprises. But science especially is, what must the world be like for science to be a successful enterprise? So I think metaphysics is very closely connected to science. But there are people who disagree with that, for sure. And in the history of metaphysics, for sure. So there were just talking to a student the other day about McTaggart. Interesting guy. Do you know McTaggart at all? Okay.
Well, I don't know him, but
no, I didn't know him either. But I did study with a teacher. I'm not sure she knew him, but we studied McTaggart because he was the bad guy in the course. Again, just a story. I'm not going to tell you the story.
Are you sure?
I'm sure I'm not going to tell you to.
Yeah.
You're interested in what you do. I'll tell you who the teacher was. Because when I was an undergraduate teacher, it was Alice Ambrose. You know who she was? Alice Ambrose. She was the person who knew Wittgenstein and transcribed the Brown Book. And I took a great course. She taught at Smith College then, a course in which we read Russell, Moore, and Wittgenstein. She knew Wittgenstein personally. She knew all three of those well.
That's pretty crazy.
That I studied with her is super crazy. And the 5 people who took that course, all of them became philosophers in one way or another.
They're 2 degrees removed now from the Titans.
That I had anything. I mean, I just recently taught a history and analytic philosophy course, and I began by telling the students that I don't really feel that. I don't feel that I know enough to really feel that. I'm not an expert on that stuff at all. But so anyway,
that's so humbling. That's so humbling for him to say that.
McTaggart.
I don't know who he is, but thus far he seems very knowledgeable.
McTaggart thought he could go and demonstrate that time doesn't exist with arguments about the nature of time. Or another philosopher at the time, not in this study in this course. I'm all over the place here. We read McTaggart and Bradley, another example. He wanted to prove that nothing existed. Okay, we read them to understand why Russell and Moore were reacting against these guys. I found actually Bradley and McTaggart more interesting than I found Moore. I thought it was a bore. Russell, I think, is one of the greats. And Wittgenstein, talk to some Wittgenstein person. That's interesting. But I don't know where Wittgenstein is now. I know it was just a conference because a student of mine came back from that conference at Harvard, where Wittgenstein is still held in high esteem. About what's called the future of Wittgenstein. That was the conference he came back from.
I don't know anything about Wittgenstein.
Anyway, but McTaggart and Bradley were bad guys. They did metaphysics in this old-fashioned way. They didn't bother to study anything about science in order to do their. Now, some people in the history of historians of science, like Kant, he knew something about science, but he didn't really study science. Or Hume, Hume certainly knew something, but I actually went to a Hume scholar recently to find out what is known about what Hume knew about Newtonian mechanics. And it seems to be not a clear answer to that question from what I could see. I may be wrong about this, and maybe Hume scholars will know better about what to say. Hume certainly knew about it. It was all over England. Did he really know about Newtonian mechanics? I think Lagrange's stuff was already developed in France by the time Hume was writing. I think I'm not positive about that. But Newtonian mechanics was developed. So I don't know. So most philosophers did not study science carefully. In fact, even some of the greats of the 20th century, like Quine. Quine did not really study physics very much. Or David Lewis, who was a chemist, actually learned chemistry and knew something about quantum mechanics and relativity. He wrote a little bit about relativity, wrote one paper on quantum mechanics, but they were not his main interests. Now, you mentioned Ted Sider. Ted has recently gotten very interested in the foundations of physics because he knows that if he's going to be a metaphysician, he's got to understand physics to an extent. And I think that's 100% correct.
That's something that our friend Tim says, and he said it on the show, that if you want to understand the metaphysics of our world, you need to look at physics.
Tim wrote a book called The Metaphysics Within Physics. Now, Tim and I draw very different conclusions from what metaphysics you find within physics, but I think it's a good place to look.
Since you mentioned McTaggart, the philosophy of time, or just questions about time, seem like they might constitute a good case study for helping us distinguish a bit between science and metaphysics. Interestingly, a lot of scientists that I speak with about philosophy, where philosophy comes up, such as Leonard Susskind, anything that they don't like, they call metaphysics. So they lump in questions that we might ask about time with astrology or ghosts or phantasms. So they have for a philosopher a non-standard use of the word metaphysics. But what sorts of questions?
That's what I feel. I never understand the question about the arrow of time. I don't see the question.
About time would constitute scientific questions, and what kind might constitute metaphysical questions?
That's a really good question. Just parenthetically, I've never met Leonard Susskind personally. I gather you have.
Oh, yeah.
I thought sometime when I was at Stanford, something about finding his door and knocking on it if he has a door still at Stanford.
I could lead you right to it.
Okay. Because I've gone through his lectures. His lectures are great, but the feeling you get about him, and this you might find interesting for what you're asking about, the feeling you get about him and many other scientists is that they really don't want to talk to philosophers.
They don't.
Because philosophers, not all scientists are like that. Sean Carroll, you probably talk to, is a big exception. Or I can think of others.
He's teaching philosophy. He switched to the Department of Philosophy.
Just like that. I mean, Charlie Goldstein's another example. He's a mathematician, but but there are others who are not like that. But and that's because they learned early on that there are certain questions that they just don't want to address. Like if you ask Leonard Susskind, look, the fundamental equations of physics, dynamics of physics, they're temporally symmetric, aren't they, Leonard? He'd say, yeah. So these equations temporally symmetric. You might have to specify a little bit more what you mean by that. So that any sequence of macroscopic events that happen in one temporal direction that are compatible with the laws that can happen in the opposite temporal direction is compatible with the laws. So you'd have to say yes. But look around the world. We never see people coming out of their graves and growing younger. Never see ice cubes, forming out of warm water. Our world is all full of temporal asymmetries. And of course, look, what grounds that? Where does that come from? Now, there's the idea, and you'll talk to David, I'm sure about this because he's the world expert on this, that it somehow is connected to statistical mechanics in some way. That's right. But physicists don't really like to get into this very much or really delve into it in a way that really gets at the bottom of it, as I think Leonard Susskind wouldn't. I'm not sure he probably knows more about this than most, but many would. Or in quantum mechanics is a famous example. As I'm sure you know, as you talk to Tim and David, and I think even me a little bit about, is a famous measurement problem in quantum mechanics. Well, that's a problem. It was pointed out by physicists originally, by Schrodinger and Einstein originally. Physicists wanted to sweep it under the rug. And it took philosophers to keep taking it out from under the rug and saying, we got to think about this. And it really is actually
brilliant. So it took philosophers to dig it from under the rug. Physicists wanted to sweep it under the rug. It took philosophers to dig it from under the rug. Brilliant.
Really central and important to understanding what quantum mechanics is about. So here is a smooth connection between physics and philosophy of physics, where the philosophers of physics were doing what the physicists should have been doing, really, in my view.
A few minutes ago, you used the phrase fundamental equations, and that brings us back to fundamentalia. What does a philosopher of science have to say about fundamentalia? What sorts of things might a philosopher of science discuss regarding fundamentalia, theories, equations, entities?
Let's talk about entities and first, a little bit of history.
Please.
From the very beginning, for the Greeks, there was the idea, and it's a very common idea, that you explain complicated things in terms of their parts, simpler things, in some sense of parts. So, the idea the earth is made up of earth, or the world is made up of earth, air, and water, and fire, or atoms, or everything is water. Is that what Thales said? Everything is water? I think it was made in this one. He said everybody was after my daughter. I never really understood what else about it. Anyhow, I
heard that he fell into a well.
Fell into a well. That's what it was. That's right. That's the story. Anyhow, so that's an idea, and it's a very attractive idea that the world is made up out of reality, is made up out of fundamental parts. It's an idea in science. Now, my idea, if we get into my ideas about metaphysics, I'm going to put them off for a while. My ideas about metaphysics are a little more subtle and more complicated than that. But the idea in science is certainly there, that we want something at the bottom in terms of which we can explain other things. So we start out with something that's, we might call basic or fundamental, at least for a while. We might find something more fundamental than that. We start with something that's, we think of as fundamental. Maybe they're atoms, and maybe atoms are made up of electrons and protons, and when electrons and protons are put together in certain ways, we get atoms of certain signs, and atoms are put together in various ways according to certain laws of physics. We can get molecules of various kinds, which explains why they can be water, why they can be acids, why they can be bases, and so on, like that. And these explanatory frameworks work beautifully, I think. So that's the idea, okay, of why this is fundamental. Now, as far as laws are concerned, of course, when you have fundamental things, you only can explain what they're doing if you have certain principles or regularities that they conform to. These are thought to be the laws about them. We haven't talked about what laws are. We can go into that in a while. But there's certain regularities about them. These would be the fundamental laws about the fundamental things. When you get more complicated things, there'll be non-fundamental laws, or sometimes called special science laws. And there's a question about how the non-fundamental and the fundamental are related to. That's a kind of metaphysical or scientific metaphysical question, also a very important question in the philosophy of science.
I'm glad you bring up the special sciences because...
Interesting. So from the laws of the specific, you should be able to derive the laws of the macro. That makes sense.
One of the other topics I wanted to talk about, and now maybe is a good time, is the reduction of the special sciences to, well, the reduction of some special sciences, or special science in particular, biology, to chemistry and then physics, and how this relates to laws and also to fundamentalia, because there are laws in biology, for instance, like scaling laws, that presumably reduce to chemistry and then physics. I'm wondering how this works and how you think about reduction and fundamentalia in this context.
So the whole business about reduction often brings people up into fighting modes.
Really, it's that
the reductionists and the anti-reductionists. I think this is not the right way to look at things exactly. Somehow the anti-reductionists think, gee, if you're a reductionist, all the money will go to the physics department. So no, but that won't happen because the biologists are the actually the ones who are finding cures for diseases and better ways to grow corn and stuff like that. So that's not going to happen anyway. Look, either you think that the world is made up out of fundamental physical things, and that's all the fundamental things there are, or you think in addition to fundamental physical things, they're fundamental biological things. So the question about life, that's one really interesting thing. For a certain time in the history of science, it was thought that there was a certain, I don't know, a substance or a fluid, or I don't know what, something called elan vital that got sprinkled onto certain physical things that made them alive. Now, I don't think anybody thinks anything like that now. Or there's some people who think that there was just, somehow there was just dust, and then it took a deity to wave a wand, whatever deities do, to make the thing to be alive. There may be people who think that now, too. I don't really know about that, but I don't think that. Okay. But people do think this about consciousness now, for sure. And Dave Chalmers is an example of someone who's argued, strongly that given all the fundamental physical stuff in the world that's not sufficient to account for why there's consciousness in the world too. So when the world was made, all the fundamental physical things had to be put in place, then also consciousness had to be added to the world. Now, I don't think that. So I'm a reductionist to the extent that I think all there is the fundamental physical stuff. There are some people who think that no, this is. Some people who, Nancy Cartwright is a good example, someone who thinks this is just taking stuff way too far. They think there's a lot of different stuff in the world at different levels, and that the whole idea of building up the world out of fundamental physical stuff. Parenthetically, you spoke to Nancy Cartwright?
No, but we might at some point.
She's a fascinating person. I don't know her very well, but I'm not going to tell the story I know about her.
Okay, you're not darn.
But I think her work is very interesting for sure. But she'd be on the opposite side of this from me. And she wrote at times things like, the world is variegated, it's a mess. It occurs to me now that reductionists like me tend to be people who in their offices are a mess. My guess is, though I don't know this, that Nancy Cartwright is a very neat person. And her philosophical views is that the world is a mess.
You mentioned David Chalmers and consciousness a moment ago. And consciousness might not fall under the typical umbrella of philosophy of science because it falls under typically the philosophy of mind. But since we've been talking about metaphysics, there are some metaphysicians who take a very robust view of metaphysics that have interesting views about consciousness. And I'm wondering, just since it's come up, what your views are on consciousness, given that you're a particularly science.
Consciousness is boring. Consciousness is a simple problem. I'm amazed that they're still asking questions about consciousness.
Minded philosopher. I'm not expecting your theory of consciousness, but maybe how you view.
Well, you might not know this because it never came up, but my wife is actually an expert on this subject, and she has, I think, written the paper that refutes Chalmers' arguments.
Oh, great!
Have you ever looked at it? And I was in full review some years ago, and she works on it. Has written stuff, and she's writing a book on this stuff now. But anyway, and her teacher was a person who taught at Rutgers, who was a colleague of mine named Brian Lohr. He died some years ago, sadly, but I think he had the key idea to show how to defend physicalism against the kind of arguments that Frank Jackson and then David Chalmers, taking Frank Jackson's arguments, developed into.
David Chalmers is a nothing burger.
His dualist views. And of course, it's interacted with philosophy of science and quantum mechanics in a big way, because for a while in the history of quantum mechanics, people were making.
His wife is an anti-communist, so she doesn't believe in the nonsense of David Chalmers.
Claims like consciousness collapses wave function. In fact, Chalmers just got into a long conversation with Chalmers at dinner a few nights ago about he has actually developed a kind of version, a sort of more sophisticated contemporary version of consciousness collapsing the wave function view. You've heard of GRW, probably.
Yeah.
Snow of GRW.
Yeah, GRW. Spontaneous wave collapse.
So the two, you can't separate these things. Philosophy is all of them. Philosophy covers everything. That's why one goes into philosophy, because you can't keep your mouth shut.
Is that an ancient typewriter in the back?
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, but my question is more about how you think consciousness needs to be investigated. I think you could just add
my wife's view and Brian Moore's view.
Who's this? Whose bust is that?
Consciousness is a physical phenomenon. I also think that because of the way we encounter our own consciousness, we will never come up with what we think of as a satisfactory explanation of why how it is can be the case that neurons doing whatever neurons do can result in something like there's something that's like, to whatever, feel a tickle in your nose or a pain in the butt or whatever what it's like.
While we're on the topic of consciousness, which might
be
a good case study, to use that phrase again for this, and fundamentalia, the word emergence comes up often in discussions of physics and metaphysics, and it's a heated and charged word. People use it in different ways. What is emergence? And what's an emergent theory? What's perhaps similar in kind an effective theory?
Well, as you said, it's used in different ways. So if one means that's...
I don't understand. Of this entire beautiful den, this guy doesn't have a table next to him on which to put his cup and his iPad? I don't get it.
Certain kinds of things didn't exist at one time, and later on those things came into existence. Sure, they emerged. At one time...
And why is the sofa situated in such a way that if you sit, you get this shelf in the back of your head? What's the point?
No mammals. They emerged. Okay. But sometimes what people mean by that...
So the sofa is usually not there. This table... What's that? New York. Good. At least he has a book holder, another book holder, another book holder, a rug, actual stone wall. So who is that? So I guess these chairs are usually not here. So he rearranged it. He should have a separate room for interviews. So what is he wearing? Sandals in the winter. Funny guy. Is this his pajamas?
Is that there's no explaining how those things emerge in terms of what they were.
And there's a bottle of water on the floor next to his left.
Beforehand. If that's what they mean by no explaining, well, again, explaining means different things. If they mean by no explaining, we haven't discussed explanation, what it is. That's another big area in philosophy of science.
Brilliant. What is an explanation? This is brilliant. Just the very fact that you can ask a question, what is an explanation? What is it? That's enough. Like, that's beautiful enough.
But if they mean by that you can't come up with what you might think of as a satisfactory thing that you say, now I see, that might be the case. But if what you mean by that is that the world had to have more stuff in it in order to get that, then I don't think that's the case. I don't think there had to be anything in the world other than what there was before there were any mammals for there to be mammals. Mammals emerge very slowly, incidentally. We know that from natural selection, evolution. It takes a long time for everything to happen, so it's not an all or no matter.
I'll leave this up to you, but since you mentioned explanation, I think that is a good area for us to transition toward. But I wanted to ask if you think it might be better to start by talking about causation, because these two things are interrelated, and I don't know which direction you'd like to start from.
Well, they surely are interrelated. Bertrand Russell was sort of like the Sidney Morgenbesser of his times in philosophy, and that he's great for quotes. His quote about causation, I'm sure you know.
I'll wait for you. I probably can do it verbatim.
I can do it verbatim, right? The concept of causation is like the British monarchy. It should be retired, but it's not, because it's kept around because it's mistakenly thought to do no harm. Now, that's what Russell said. I didn't get it exactly right. That's what Russell said. I don't think that's right. I think the notion of causation, as Nancy Cartwright came up before, wrote in a paper, is very central to how we think about the world. But I don't think it's fundamental. I don't think that when you get what physics says is fundamental, the notion of causation will be there. And that was one of Russell's points. But you want to keep it around. You want to explain how it emerged, not in the sense of it having to be added like someone had to come along and say, well, let's add some causation now. But just explain how, whatever the physical stuff it was there, how it getting into a certain situation led there to be causal relations and things. And I think giving an account of that is like one of the great tasks of contemporary philosophy. Now, that is not something that scientists will engage in, but it is something that people in philosophy, and to some extent in computer science and decision theory and other things will enter into, and statisticians. I don't know if you talked to David Papineau?
I have a couple of times.
So he's writing on this, on his probabilistic approaches to causation, as have Judea Pearl and Clark Leamore and various other people in computer science and philosophy of science. And Jim Woodward is another interesting person who's written on this in this stuff. Oh, there's a whole other approach that comes originally from David Hume, but from David Lewis in particular, which is sort of a counterfactual, a kind of causation. So the throwing of the rock caused the breaking of the window, because if you hadn't thrown the rock, the window wouldn't have broken. The first account, which is a probabilistic statistical account, it says that when occurrence of one event raises the probability of another event, or some other kinds of probabilistic relations, and there isn't something like we might call a common causal explanation of why there's a correlation, then there's a causal relation. Now, what I just gave was circular, because I use causation in the account, but the people who do this have a way in which they get rid of the circularity, they think. These are the two main approaches. One of the projects, if I live long enough, that I want to do is to connect these two approaches. So they're connected, because I think if you're going to do counterfactuals, and cause counterfactuals right, you got to make it a probabilistic account of counterfactuals. You got to get rid of David Lewis's approach of counterfactuals.
So if you didn't throw the rock to break the window, would the window have broken either way? How do you know that the rock is what broke the window? Maybe not. Maybe the window was going to break either way.
That's for a metaphysics or a logic discussion, not for today, but it's also something else I'm interested in. But eventually you're going to want to give an account of counterfactuals in terms of conditional probabilities. And I think when you do that, you're going to have an account of causation in terms of conditional probabilities too, but it's going to be an account of causations between particular events. The throwing of the rock on this occasion.
Told you. He doesn't have any place to put. He's overburdened with holding stuff. There's a table right there. Just put it here so that he's more comfortable. This guy as well. He's holding the pad and the pen. There's too much.
Breaking the window on this occasion. Whereas the correlational accounts associated with Papineau and Woodward and Judea Pearl is a type causation account. And I think these two need to be fit together in some way. I don't know how to do it now. I don't know anybody who's done it, but maybe that's just because I haven't looked around enough. I just haven't had the time to do it. That's a really interesting project. You have your own dissertation project right now, right? Or maybe you're just a famous film director. But if you want a dissertation project, this is what I would direct students. I think it's a great area.
You just said many words that I think will be foreign to some of our listeners who aren't familiar with the literature on causation.
I'm sorry.
No problem. So counterfactuals, one of them, conditional probability. I think we should skip the conditional probability for now, but it would be nice to hear what counterfactuals are and how they relate to causation quite broadly.
Okay, so conditionals in English are something that logicians have studied.
Counterfactuals or conditionals?
I'm talking about conditionals first. Conditionals are statements in English that logicians have studied for a long time. They're saying like, if this happens, then that happens. And obviously we're very interested in conditionals because they're the bridges between a this and a that.
He's putting half of the room on the floor. Something is going to spill.
Right? Okay. So, and in ordinary logic, every student who has to take a logic course studies, they study material conditionals. Counterfactual conditionals are not material conditionals. They're a little more complicated. If this had happened, then this would have happened. If they counted the votes correctly in the Bush election of 2000, Gore would have been
Gore.
Gore would have been president. I don't know if that's true or not. Somebody might say that.
Gore Bush has a nice ring to it too.
Let me take the example that's used in the literature all the time. If Oswald had not shot Kennedy, Kennedy would have run a second term. I think that's plausibly true, or something like that is true, and the neighborhood is true. We understand that. Now, it's not an ordinary material conditional. It's not what's called truth functional. A truth functional conditional is a conditional such that if you know the truth values of each part, the antecedent and the consequent, you could know the truth value of the whole. Counterfactual is not like that. Counterfactual means something about how the antecedent and the consequent are connected with each other. They are very interesting kinds of statements if you're interested in science, because scientists are interested in these all the time when they're doing experiments. If you were to do this, that would happen. If you had done this, this would have happened. Okay, this is all, in the sciences all the time. Causation seems to be closely connected to counterfactuals in the way I said before. The throwing of the brick caused the breaking of the window, because if you hadn't thrown the brick, the window wouldn't have broken. Now, that's not exactly right. It needs to be refined. That's the basic idea, and the idea that Hume suggested at one point. He has two definitions of causation. This is the second one he gives. This is the one that David Lewis picked up and developed an account of it, and he realized it needed some refinement. He gave refinement.
Okay, brilliant stuff. We'll come back to it.
Hey guys, my name is Ali Al-Kargouli. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. In this video, I'm going to explain to you this number E, where it came from, and why it even exists, and why it's important, and why is it equal to 2.71.
Mm-hmm. They cloned her. A 1,000 hips.
Oh, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the...
Is the alleged United Healthcare CEO killer Luigi Mangione? Is the alleged United Healthcare CEO killer Luigi Mangione a hero? Well, as you all know, he was arrested at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania and charged with the killing.
Yeah, he's a terrorist. Terrorists, everybody knows they are heroes. To the left.
Of the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian.
The left hate democracy. They love dictatorships and terrorism.
Thompson. Now, if you look at his X account, you'll find thousands of comments supporting him. So why are so many people propping up an alleged killer? Well, you just need to read a few of the many horrible stories of patients and family members who were denied coverage from United Healthcare. Here are a few that I took from the comment section of Dr. Glockenflecken's.
We can read about babies that were refused toys. Just heartbreaking, heart-wrenching stories about babies refused toys at toy stores. There's so many stories that we can read about that. Heart-wrenching.
Decent video. I've been on a seizure med that's been working for 5 years now. Starting in January, they want me to go on meds that don't work. As a Canadian who has a home down south, I bought a United Healthcare Gold plan when I'm there just in case. 2 years ago, I fell through a window and cut my thumb off. Went to the hospital, the doctor reattached it. 9 hours later, I was home. United denied the claim because I wasn't admitted overnight. Meanwhile, my Amex card I used to fly there covered it without question. See how that works. This happened to me with UHC. They stopped covering a medication my husband was taking for years for diabetes. The price went up to over $500 per month. Too much for us to afford and eat. Denied a biopsy by UHC. They wanted cheaper diagnostics first. I paid out of pocket for it. Ended up malignant. Surgeon said within weeks I'd have lost half my jaw. All to save $700. Now, many years ago, I accepted United Healthcare insurance in my practice. And I'll tell you, they are quite possibly the worst of the health insurance companies. They once denied coverage of a patient of mine who was a paraplegic with pressure sores. I performed surgery to close the open sores on his backside caused by him being paraplegic, and United Healthcare rejected the claim as cosmetic. Now, when health insurance companies deny claims like these, they just tell you to appeal the denial if you disagree with the decision. They try to make it sound as if it's nice and simple. So then you appeal the denial, then they deny you again. And sometimes they delay and deny you so many times that they declare that the time limit for appealing has passed and their decision is final. So then what do you do as a physician and a business owner? Do you bill the patient for something that should have been covered by the insurance company? Well, insurance companies do this to pit doctors and patients against each other. Although there are stories of health insurance companies screwing over their policyholders with all insurance companies, I've always believed that United Healthcare is one of the worst of them. They're the worst. Now, every year when I decide what health insurance to give to my families and my employees, I don't even consider United Healthcare because I know it is such a horrible insurance company. And even given all the traumatic and sad stories that are flooding social media about how United Healthcare's policies have caused misery and suffering for so many people, you would think that United Healthcare would rethink how it conducts business. Maybe they would announce that they're going to make changes to actually prevent their policyholders from being denied the care and the medications they need. I mean, that would make sense, right? Well, according to the video that was leaked from an internal meeting, the United
Leaked video show United Health CEO saying insurer will continue practices that combat unnecessary care. Good. Heroes. Actual, some heroes don't wear capes, as they say.
Health Group, and this is the parent company of United Healthcare. Their CEO, Andrew Whitty, said, "Our role is a critical role, and we make sure that care is safe, appropriate, and delivered when people need it." And this was in an address to the
Yeah, this guy is afraid of losing his license, so maybe he's pandering to the extreme left so that they wouldn't take his license.
company's employees following the murder of the United Healthcare CEO's death. We guard against the pressures that exist for unsafe care or for unnecessary care to be delivered in a way which makes the whole system too complex and ultimately unsustainable. He added that employees should tune out criticism of the insurance company, saying that it does not reflect reality. What the hell? Well, according to reports, United Healthcare reported a net income of $22.3 billion in 2023 and $20.6 billion in 2022. Now, I'm just a doctor, but what is the purpose of a health insurance company?
What's your income? Why don't you tell us about your income? Tell us about your income. You have 5.3 million subscribers. Tell us about your income from this source, from this revenue stream. What an idiot. What a commie.
Company making that much money, while so many other policyholders don't get the medications or the treatments that they need paid for. Well, I'm not a health policy expert.
You have enough money. You should give everything away to other people. You've lived enough. You should, why, right? You have this beautiful home. You've lived in it long enough. Now give it away to somebody else so somebody else can enjoy it. Equality, right?
The CEO of an insurance company, but wouldn't it make sense to send those profits back to the actual patients to help them pay for their deductibles, their co-pays, and their
What about your profits? Why don't you give your profits back to your patients?
insurance, or maybe to use that money to reduce the exorbitant monthly fees that employers and individual
Exorbitant? What about your fees?
policyholders have to pay in order to get that insurance? Well, although I think that that's a great idea, unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Now, with all that being said, what are some simple things that you and I can do to show United Healthcare that we will not stand for this? Well, first, ask your employer to consider insurance companies other than United Healthcare. We shouldn't give them our money or control over our health. Now, this doesn't mean that other insurance companies are that much better, but at least they are United Healthcare. Second, if you pay for your own insurance,
they're not much better, but at least they're not United Healthcare. Wow, amazing. What an amazing reason.
Choose one other than United Healthcare. Now, health insurance is so incredibly expensive, so be really choosy with which company you choose to pay for your healthcare needs. And third, continue sharing your stories about how United Healthcare and health insurance has failed you. Now, recently, in the middle of the whole hubbub about United Healthcare, a different health insurance company, Anthem Blue Cross, tried to slip through a new rule that would allow them to determine how many hours of anesthesia they would cover for certain medically necessary surgeries. That means that if your surgeon goes over the time limit these bureaucrats set, then the patient would be liable for any overages. Now, after a massive online pushback both on social media and traditional media, they rescinded this ridiculous attempt to make more money on the backs of doctors and patients. So as hopeless as this all can seem, our voices, if they are loud and angry enough, will be heard. Our healthcare third-party payer system system is a complete mess. Now, I want to tell you, if you are angry because you've been denied coverage or your insurer has forced you to change medications so they can make more money off of you, you are entitled to this anger. The system is set up by corporations and supported by politicians to make money by not paying for your healthcare needs. The people who should determine what medications you take or medical procedures you undergo should be you and your doctor, period.
This is nothing but disinformation. Everything in this video is disinformation. Marxist disinformation.
Now, that being said, I don't consider Luigi Mangione a hero in any way, shape, or form.
Why not?
Violence is almost never the answer. And I do
Oh,
hope
almost. Oh, almost. Oh, okay.
that justice will be served in this case. But this whole horrible event has ignited a very important discussion about health insurance
Well, that was his point. Terrorism works
in the United States and its many failings. And I hope that this discussion can bring about some much needed changes. So do you think Luigi Mangione is a hero? And has your health insurance failed you? Well, please share your thoughts in the
The only thing that should change is that Mangione should be executed. That's the only change that should happen.
comments. Then check out this video of how I'm getting investigated for unprofessional conduct. Yes, me. And as always, remember to eat real food, use clean skincare, and auto-rejuvenate before you operate.
What's real food? What an idiot. She's not even.
Oh, this is Dr.
She's not even pretty. She doesn't have wide hips. I mean, she's okay-ish.
Oh, this is Dr. Grande. Today, I will analyze the case of Lily Phillips.
Lily Phillips. Yeah, I already saw a little bit of her. She's not pretty.